They warned us not to talk about claw marks higher than a grizzly could reach, but I'll start with the truth. The thing that kept me up last night wasn't the marks at all. It was the image of a boy's backpack stuck halfway up a pine like someone had pressed it into the trunk and twisted until the bark swallowed it. I can still see the zipper trembling, even though the air was dead still. I can still hear the sound of the fabric rubbing against wood, like something shifting just behind the bark, trying to decide if it wanted out. I've worked wilderness law enforcement for 15 years. Search and rescue, missing persons, boundary patrol. I'm the one they call when hikers vanish, when screams get reported at 2 a.m, when someone swears they saw a figure moving through the tree line, even though the nearest road is 26 miles away. I wasn't always this way, paranoid, exhausted, second-guessing every sound, but the forest has a way of grinding you down until you're nothing but raw nerves and muscle memory. I didn't choose this job because I love nature. People say that a lot, like rangers are born hugging trees. But I came out here because losing someone breaks you in a way that only solitude can numb. My brother disappeared when I was 17, walked into the woods behind our house on a September day, and never came back. Search teams found nothing, not a boot print, not a thread of clothing, not even a broken twig. It was as if he stepped into the trees and the trees closed behind him. I've spent years convincing myself I took this career to prevent that from happening to anyone else. The truth is simpler. I wanted answers. I wanted to see the things the forest swallows. I wanted to look long enough that the woods blinked first. But they don't blink. They never blink. The first strange report came in early spring, just warm enough that the snow was slush and every step sounded like someone wringing a wet towel. A group of campers said they'd heard something pacing outside their tents right before dawn. Not footsteps, just pacing, like weight shifting side to side. They thought it might be a bear until they realized the impressions in the snow were too deep and too far apart. When I got there, the prints had already softened, water pooling in the depressions. They looked human for a few minutes before melting into unrecognizable shapes. I told myself it was just thaw distortion, but the unease dug in early. The second report came from a hunter who found claw marks gouged into the trunk of a pine, 40 feet up. The bark was ripped off in curling strips, resin still bleeding fresh. No animal we have here stands that tall. No ladder marks in the soil. No branches low enough to climb, just vertical destruction as if something had dragged its hand, or whatever passes for a hand, straight down the length of the tree. I felt the edges with my thumb. They were warm. 2 days later, I saw something move between the trees on the ridge, and the memory still makes my skin crawl. It wasn't the shape. I barely caught the silhouette before it slipped behind the timberline. It was the timing. Trees don't sway in unison that way. They don't bow, as if something huge passes between them without touching a single trunk. And they don't go dead still afterward, like they're scared of being noticed. I tried to rationalize all of it. Stress, exhaustion, tricks of shadow. The mind sees predators where it wants to see patterns. I clung to that idea longer than I should have. Then came the missing girl. Her parents were tourists from Phoenix. Only child, 12 years old. They said she wandered from the campsite for a few minutes before sundown and didn't come back. I arrived about an hour into the search, and her mother kept staring at the tree line like she expected the forest to spit her daughter out whole. We found no tracks, not even her sneaker prints, though she'd been barefoot around the fire earlier. Dogs picked up nothing. The girl seemed to have vanished between one breath and the next. Near the riverbank, I crouched down to study the mud, and for a moment I thought I saw a partial print. 3 toes, long, spread wide. Too wide. But the longer I looked, the more the mud seemed to rearrange itself until I couldn't tell if there had been a print at all. My vision blurred. My pulse pounded in my ears. Heat radiated off the soil like a fever. I blinked, steadied myself, and when I looked again, the mud lay smooth as untouched clay. I didn't tell anyone about that part. The search lasted 3 days before authorities scaled it back. Her parents stayed another week, sleeping in their car, waiting for a miracle. I walked the perimeter every night, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Sometimes I thought I heard a girl calling for help. Sometimes my radio crackled with a whisper I couldn't make out. Sometimes I found branches arranged in odd shapes, triangles, spirals, cages, like something marking my movement. I told myself it was kids messing around, or the wind, or my own grief digging up old wounds. I had to tell myself something because the silence was starting to take on weight. Silence shouldn't feel heavy. It shouldn't hang from branches like something watching from above. A week after the parents finally left, I found the backpack. Not at ground level, not torn apart, not weather-beaten. It was wedged halfway up a pine tree, 12 feet higher than I could reach, standing on my truck. No rope marks, no claw marks this time, just inserted into the trunk as if the tree had grown around it. I climbed up with spikes and gear to retrieve it. My gloves stuck to the bark, which smelled faintly of burnt hair. Every time my hand closed on the resin-coated surface, I felt a faint vibration, like something deep inside the wood was shivering. The backpack wasn't empty. Inside were the girl's water bottle, her jacket, and a sketchbook. Most pages were blank, but a few held drawings, charcoal smudges that looked like tall, thin silhouettes standing in places I recognized. The ridge, the river bend, even the search base camp. On the last page was a crude circle drawn in thick, frantic strokes. Inside the circle was a shape like a stretched handprint, longer than any human limb. I felt my breath catch. Something brushed my ankle, soft, cold, like fingertips dragging lightly across the back of my boot. I almost fell. When I looked down, nothing was there. The ground below lay in perfect stillness. For the first time in my career, I left the area without logging the precise coordinates. I told myself the backpack was lodged there by a storm. I told myself the drawings meant nothing. I told myself that cold brush against my ankle was a twig shifting as I climbed. But that night, lying in my cabin, I smelled burnt hair again. I heard the faint sound of fabric rubbing against wood, zippered teeth trembling. Something outside paced slowly around the cabin, not making footfalls, just shifting weight. One side to the other, like a body swaying in place. When I finally dared to look out the window, I saw a shadow at the tree line, tall, motionless, too narrow to be human. It swayed once, very slightly, as if laughing without sound, and the pine nearest it, 40 feet up, had 3 fresh claw marks running down the trunk, still dripping resin like blood. The night after I saw that shadow swaying at the tree line, I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, something snapped me awake. The creak of the cabin settling, the faint scrape of something against the siding, the soft pressure of weight shifting in the soil outside. It felt like the ground itself was breathing, slow and deep, like something enormous waited underneath the roots. By dawn, my nerves were shot. I splashed cold water on my face, grabbed my gear, and headed out early, telling myself I needed to revisit the area where I'd found the girl's backpack. I needed to prove to myself that nothing unnatural had happened, that I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. The forest was too quiet, not peaceful, quiet in that way where sound feels like it's been stripped out of the world. Even my footsteps felt muffled, my own breathing swallowed by the trees. Fog clung to the ground in thin strands, curling around my boots like fingers trying to pull me off balance. Half a mile in, I started noticing shapes in the mist. Not figures, not exactly, just columns of smoke-thick shadow where the fog should have thinned. They vanished whenever I focused on them, reappearing in the corners of my vision. I kept walking. When I reached the pine where the backpack had been lodged, the bark was different. The place where the pack had been swallowed looked freshly grown over, smoother than the rest of the trunk, as if the tree had healed overnight. I ran my fingers along the bark. It was warm again, that same faint heat, like something under the surface still living, still moving. To my left, twigs snapped. I turned sharply, hand on my sidearm, but nothing moved. Then a voice echoed through the fog, a little girl's voice, soft, breathless, farther away than it sounded. Help me. I froze. My ears rang. The voice wasn't pleading. It wasn't crying. It just sounded empty, like someone trying to mimic a tone without understanding the emotion behind it. Help me. This time it came from ahead of me, then behind, then from the trees on both sides. The fog held the sound unnaturally well, almost amplifying it. I told myself it had to be my mind replaying memories from the search, some cruel trick of stress and sleep deprivation. But the voice didn't feel imagined. It felt close, real, intentional. I forced myself to breathe slow, steady. I raised my radio and keyed in. Dispatch, this is Ranger Hale. I'm at Grid 22B. Any units report a child in the area? Any lost day hikers? The radio hissed, then cleared. Negative, Hale. You're the only one logged within 10 miles. Static crackled again, a faint whisper under the noise. It's cold. I dropped the radio. It hit the ground with a soft thud, echoing too loud in the emptiness. The whisper wasn't from dispatch. It wasn't even on the same frequency. It was the same voice from the fog, the same cadence, the same hollow imitation of emotion. And I didn't press the mic button. I should have left then. I should have walked straight out and never come back. But I needed to understand. If I walked away, the thing that stole that girl, maybe the same kind of thing that stole my brother, would stay hidden. It would keep taking. I couldn't let that happen again. I pushed deeper into the trees. The voices faded slowly, replaced by another sound, a faint tapping. Not rhythmic, not random either. Like someone lightly drumming fingers against hollow bark. 5 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. 1. Then silence. When the forest went quiet again, it felt like something had leaned in close to listen. Ahead of me, I saw the ridge where I'd first glimpsed the silhouette days earlier. The trees there grew thinner, twisted by wind and time into shapes that leaned out over the slope like they were peering down into the valley. My heartbeat quickened. The ridge was where the hunters reported hearing something too tall move through the tree line, where they found that strange scrape in the dirt shaped like a knee print, except it was 4 feet off the ground. I climbed slowly, every muscle tight. The fog thinned as I ascended, revealing charred patches of earth scattered like burns from lightning strikes. Except lightning doesn't leave claw marks through the ash, and lightning doesn't leave the smell of sulfur and wet fur lingering long after the air clears. At the top of the ridge, the wind shifted sharply. Warm air hit my face, humid and sour, like breath. The soil beneath my boots vibrated once, so subtle I could have mistaken it for my pulse. I stepped closer to the edge. Below me, the forest stretched in a vast carpet of dark pine, but one patch of trees was wrong. They were leaning outward as if pushed from inside. Their trunks bulged slightly in the middle, like something massive had pressed against them from below, and the ground between them had caved inward, forming a shallow depression that pulsed. Actually pulsed, like a heartbeat under the soil. I don't know how long I stood there staring, long enough that the wind died completely, long enough that every hair on my arms stood on end. Then something moved inside the depression. A ripple in the dirt, small at first, then larger. The soil cracked as if stretched by a hand pressing upward. A faint groan rolled through the earth, a groan that didn't sound like rock shifting. It sounded like exhalation. I stepped back instinctively. My boot landed on a stick that snapped like a gunshot. The groan stopped instantly, and the depression stilled. The forest held its breath. A moment later, a low, clicking sound came from directly behind me. Slow, deliberate, like someone snapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth, but wrong. Too deep, too resonant, like the sound was coming from inside a hollow chest. I turned slowly. Nothing. Just trees. Just silence. But they were wrong too. The nearest pine had fresh claw marks, 3 deep parallel grooves running horizontally instead of vertically. The resin leaking from them smelled like iron. My radio suddenly crackled behind me on the ground. I hadn't picked it up. I didn't even remember dropping it earlier on the ridge. But it was on now, speaker hissing. Then a voice came through. Not dispatch, not human. A perfect imitation of my own voice. Where are you? My mouth went dry. My hands tingled with pins and needles numbness. The voice didn't just sound like me, it matched the exact tired cadence I'd had that morning. It was like hearing a recording of myself from minutes ago, except the words weren't anything I'd said. The radio hissed again. Louder. Then the voice laughed. A quiet, breathless laugh. The same laugh I'd heard from the tree line the night before. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the trees. The ridge behind me dropped steeply, and one misstep could send me tumbling. But staying still felt worse, felt like waiting. The ground vibrated again, stronger this time. Not a rumble, footsteps. Something heavy was moving beneath the soil, coming closer. Each impact sent tremors through the ridge, dislodging small stones that skittered down the slope. I crouched instinctively, hands over my ears as the ground beneath me began to bulge upward in a line, moving toward me like a wave of earth. I stumbled back, nearly slipping off the edge. The rising line stopped just feet away, forming a mound of shifting dirt. Then the mound split down the middle. I saw darkness underneath. Not a burrow, not a tunnel, an opening. Something exhaled. Warm, rancid air hit my face with the smell of sulfur, wet fur, and something else. Something metallic and sweet, like blood left out in the sun. The opening widened, and from deep inside something whispered, "Found you." My body reacted before my mind did. I dropped to my stomach and slid down the far side of the ridge, dirt and roots ripping at my arms as I half fell, half skidded into the brush below. The earth trembled once more, sharp, frustrated, then went still. When I finally stopped sliding, I lay flat against the ground, gasping, ears ringing. The forest was utterly silent again. But somewhere beyond the trees, I heard 3 slow taps, then 1, then nothing. I stayed on the forest floor longer than I want to admit, belly pressed into the leaf rot, listening for the slightest sound of pursuit. But nothing came. No footsteps. No vibrations. Not even the wind dared to move. It felt like the whole forest was holding itself still, waiting for me to rise so it could exhale again. When my breathing finally steadied, I pushed myself up on shaking arms. Dirt clung to my face. My palms were scraped raw. I could feel my heartbeat in my gums. I don't remember standing, only realizing suddenly that I was upright and swaying, trying to get my legs under me. I needed to get out of that valley. Every instinct I had, the ones trained by years of search and rescue, and the ones born from losing my brother, screamed at me to move. But as soon as I took one step, a cold pressure built around my chest. Not pain, pressure. Like someone had placed a hand flat on my sternum and begun to lean. Not enough to stop me, but enough to say, "I know where you are." My breath caught. The pressure lifted. I walked. The trees grew denser as I descended, branches knitting overhead like ribs closing around a heart. Shadows pooled on the ground in long, unnatural streaks. Every few minutes I thought I saw someone standing beside a tree. Tall, narrow silhouettes, but they vanished when I blinked. Halfway down the slope, the forest shifted temperature so abruptly that I stopped short. A wave of hot air rolled past me, humid and thick, carrying the smell of sulfur. It had no source. No geothermal vents, no fire, no sunlight, strong light, strong enough to create heat like that under the canopy. It passed in a single long exhalation, then the world turned cold again. I pushed forward. Somewhere behind me, something clicked its tongue. 3 times. I didn't look back. By late afternoon, I reached the old service road, barely more than a pair of tire tracks overgrown by moss and creeping fern. Normally, this stretch calmed me. It was familiar ground, a route I'd walked 100 times during trail inspections. That day, the road felt hostile. The forest on either side leaned inward, as if listening. Shadows stretched across the ruts like cords you'd trip over. I kept my hand on my sidearm, like though I knew the gun wouldn't matter against something that could make the soil split open under my feet. About a mile down, I heard running water, too loud to be the creek that winded behind the ridge. The sound was wrong, not the steady rush of a stream, but short bursts like someone pouring water from a height in quick intervals. Curiosity won out over fear, or maybe fear was the reason I approached. The woods had gone quiet again, that heavy, waiting quiet. The kind that made you feel observed. Through the brush, I found the source. A tree stump, freshly cut, too fresh. No crews had been out here. No storms had taken any trees. The stump was pale and wet, sap pooling around its edges, and water, actual water, dripped from above onto its surface. Not rain, not dew. Droplets falling in a straight line, rhythmic and steady. My gaze followed the path upward, and I felt my stomach drop. Above the stump, 30 feet up the trunk of the next tree, something was wedged into the bark. At first, I thought it was a torn tarp or a piece of clothing, but as the wind shifted, it turned slightly, and I saw hair. Human hair. A scalp hung there, pressed flat against the pine like a leaf caught in sap. The hair was long, dark, matted. The skin around it was smooth, bloodless, almost plastic, and from the base of the hairline, water dripped in long, slow beads. Not water. Blood thinned by time. Cold sweat prickled my skin. My mouth tasted of metal. My vision pulsed. I staggered backward, nearly tripping on a root. The forest around me groaned, branches twisting slightly, trunks flexing as if responding to my reaction. I felt something warm brush the back of my neck, too soft to be a leaf, too precise to be wind. When I spun around, no one was there, but something moved just at the edge of my hearing. A low vibration, a deep inhale. I left the stump behind. An hour before dusk, I reached a clearing that shouldn't exist. I knew every mapped patch of open ground in this region, but this one, I had never seen it. Perfect circle, no brush, no saplings, just flattened grass swirled clockwise. The air in the clearing was warmer than the surrounding forest and carried the faint smell of wet fur. I should have skirted around it, but the ground drew me in. Dead center lay a pile of rocks, stacked neatly, unnaturally, 3 tiers. Not a cairn, not a campsite marker. Something older, something deliberate. The rocks vibrated, not visually, just beneath my feet, like a faint humming. I knelt and held my hand above them. Heat radiated upward, steady, pulsing with a rhythm too slow to be a machine and too regular to be natural. A heartbeat, a goddamn heartbeat coming from underneath the soil. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I backed away 1 step. The rocks clicked all at once, all 3 tiers. A perfect, deliberate sequence. 5 clicks, then 3, then 1. 5, 3, 1. The same pattern I'd heard tapped against the trees earlier. The clearing held its breath. Then something whispered from beneath the rocks, so faint I almost mistook it for shifting soil. Come back down. My bones turned to ice. The voice wasn't the girl's this time. It wasn't mine. It wasn't mimicked. It was something deep, ancient, resonant enough that I felt the words more than heard them. And beneath the sound was something worse. A faint echo of multiple voices overlapping, like someone speaking with a crowd trapped inside their throat. The forest around me darkened, not from clouds, not from dusk. The trees seemed to lean inward, branches folding slightly as if bowing toward the clearing. Every instinct screamed, run. I did. I sprinted through the brush, lungs burning, legs slipping in the loam. Branches clawed at my arms. Something crashed in the woods behind me, moving fast, too fast. The sound wasn't footsteps. It was more like soil being displaced by enormous weight, like something pushing through the ground just under the surface. I pushed myself harder. Up ahead, the trail split, one direction toward my cabin, the other toward the old mining roads. I veered left toward the cabin. I shouldn't have. As soon as I passed the first bend, I smelled sulfur. Thick, heavy, everywhere around me. The trees on both sides had claw marks, deep rips scoring the trunks horizontally and vertically. Some marks were 9 or 10 feet high. The air vibrated. Not the ground this time, the air. A droning frequency built around me, low but penetrating. My teeth hurt. My vision wavered at the edges. Every instinct screamed that something enormous was approaching. I forced myself forward, stumbling onto the narrow footbridge that crossed the ravine 1/2 mile from the cabin. The boards creaked beneath me. The ravine below was dry, but the air rising from it was strangely warm. Halfway across, the droning stopped. Silence slammed down with such force that I staggered. Then, from directly beneath the bridge, something exhaled. Not wind. Not animal. Something close. So close I felt the heat rise between the planks. I backed away slowly, one board at a time. A voice floated up through the slats, my brother's voice, Clear. Calm. Wrong. Don't leave me. The world tilted. My knees buckled. A ringing started in my ears so loud it drowned out thought. My brother was 17 when he vanished. I hadn't heard his voice in decades, yet I knew instantly every cadence, every inflection. But beneath it was another voice layered almost invisibly under the sound. One that didn't understand human emotion. One that was learning. Don't leave me. The voice repeated, more confidently this time. I bolted. I don't remember running. Just bursting past the end of the bridge and tearing through the trees until I saw the outline of my cabin through the brush. By the time I reached it, night had fallen. But something was waiting in the darkness. The cabin's outline looked wrong in the dark. The angles seemed slightly skewed, as if the structure had shifted on its foundation while I was gone. The windows reflected no moonlight, even though the sky above was clear. And the forest around it didn't stop where it usually did. The tree line felt closer, crowding the clearing, like pressing inward like a throat tightening around a breath. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, bent over, hands on my knees, lungs scraping for air. It wasn't just exhaustion. It felt like the air was thinner here, as if the clearing itself didn't want me filling my lungs. A soft tapping echoed from the cabin porch. 5 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. 1 tap. My stomach dropped. I had left that clearing miles back. The pattern shouldn't have followed me. Patterns don't move, but this wasn't a pattern. It was communication. And whatever spoke in that rhythm knew exactly where I lived. The porch steps creaked, but not like someone stepping on them. It was too slow, too stretching, like the wood itself was bending under a weight that wasn't quite touching it. My hand went to my sidearm, even though deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. But the weight of the gun steadied me, not with confidence, just with familiarity. I approached the cabin carefully. That's when I noticed the door. It was open 3 inches. I never left it open. Even when I was half asleep or exhausted or running late, I always locked it. The forest teaches you that early. If you don't control your boundaries, you lose them. I reached the porch, boots creaking on the boards. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a faint rustling inside, like something brushing against the walls, something testing the interior space. The smell hit next. Not sulfur this time. Something worse. Burnt hair mixed with the metallic sweetness of spoiled blood. A scent thick enough that I felt it on my tongue. I raised my flashlight and nudged the door open. The beam cut through the dark in a long, trembling arc. My living room looked normal at first glance. Chair, table, gear shelf. But the shadows were wrong. They leaned inward, sharp and pointed, as if cast by objects much taller than the furniture. And on the far wall, carved deep into the wood, were 3 long claw marks, fresh, the resin still dripping. The same marks from the pine, 40 feet up, except here, at eye level. Something brushed the back of my neck again, light, cold. I spun, flashlight shaking, but no one stood behind me, just the clearing, just the trees. But as my beam crossed the trunks, I saw faces reflected in the bark. Not real faces, just reflections shaped like faces. Eyes, mouths, too many, all staring, all motionless. My flashlight flickered. No, something made it flicker. A low vibration passed under my boots. The porch boards trembled, not from weight, but from sound traveling through them. A resonance, a hum, a familiar one. The heartbeat, the same rhythm from the stone pile in the clearing, except now it was under my cabin. The hum grew stronger, warping the air. The window glass rattled. The boards groaned. My teeth hurt from the frequency. I took a step back from the doorway. The house exhaled. A warm draft pushed past me from inside, wet, humid, carrying the stench of something that had crawled through damp soil for a very long time. And along with the breath came a whisper. Not the girl's voice. Not mine. Not my brother's. Something deeper. Home. I stumbled back off the porch. My heel caught the edge of the last step and I nearly fell. When I regained my balance and raised the flashlight again, something stood inside the doorway. A silhouette. Tall. Too tall. Its head nearly brushed the top of the frame. Its shoulders hunched outward unnaturally, as if pulled wide by invisible hooks. and its arms hung much lower than a person's should, down to its knees, maybe lower. The beam caught only part of it, the outline, the suggestion of limbs. But its shadow filled the cabin behind it, stretching impossibly far, as though there were dozens more bodies attached to the same silhouette, all connected at some impossible point. It didn't move. It just swayed. A slow, gentle motion, like someone rocking on their heels while deciding what to do next. The same motion I'd seen at the tree line nights ago. My flashlight flickered harder. The beam cut out entirely for a moment, and in that moment of blackness, I heard the sound clearly. Fabric rubbing against wood, like a zipper tremoring, like something shifting inside my cabin. The light snapped back on. The silhouette was gone. The doorway was empty. I didn't go inside. I ran. Not toward the service road, not toward the trail system. I ran toward the old mining sector, an area we were forbidden to enter without authorization because the tunnels were unstable collapses, deadly gas-unseen pits. It wasn't safe, but I didn't care. The forest behind me erupted with sound. Not footsteps, not breathing, soil being displaced. Something enormous rushing beneath the forest floor, following me, the ground rising and falling with its movement. Trees shook as it passed under their roots. Dead branches rained down around me. I ran faster. The woods grew colder as I neared the old mining grounds. The air shifted, thin, metallic, carrying an echo that didn't belong outdoors. The smell of old stone, rusted metal, abandoned places that remember suffering. I reached the chain-link fence marking the restricted boundary. Normally it was secured with a thick padlock, but tonight it hung open. The chain was still wrapped around the gatepost, but twisted, bent outward like someone had grabbed the metal and peeled it apart with their bare hands, or not hands. Behind me, the ground bulged as something slammed into the soil, stopping just outside the clearing. Trees rattled. A slow tapping echoed between the trunks. 5, 3, 1, the exact rhythm, repeated patiently, as if calling me back, as if waiting for me to make the wrong choice. I slipped through the opening in the fence. The air inside the boundary felt instantly colder, denser. Every sound echoed slightly, as if the whole terrain were hollow. My breath fogged in front of me, even though the night wasn't nearly cold enough for that. Ahead, the old mining road sloped downward into the dark, framed by rusted rails half swallowed by moss. The entrance to the main tunnel lay another half-mile in. Another exhale drifted through the trees behind me, lower this time, disappointed, displeased. I kept moving. My boots crunched old gravel, the sound too loud in the dead silence. Even my heartbeat echoed. I felt watched not from behind, but from beneath, like the soil here was thinner, like something enormous waited just under the surface. When I reached the tunnel mouth, I stopped. The entrance was partially caved in, but a narrow gap remained under the collapsed rock, just large enough for a person to crawl through. Cold air spilled from the opening in steady pulses like the mine itself was breathing. Inside, the dark wasn't just absence of light. It felt physical, thick, heavy, and far back in that blackness, faint and almost rhythmic, I heard it. 3 taps, then 1, then 5, out of order this time. Not a warning sequence, an invitation. A voice spoke from the tunnel, barely audible. Come down, not pleading, not threatening, certain. I backed up slowly, flashlight trembling, but the beam struck something on the ground just outside the tunnel. A boot print, fresh, human, and next to it, another print, not human, not even close, long, deep, split in the center like a dragging palm with too many joints. It pressed into the gravel with unmistakable intent. They were leading inside, and the human print, it was a size I recognized. I felt my pulse freeze, my brother's size. For a long time, I just stared at those prints. My beam trembling over the gravel as 2 impossible truths collided in my skull. One footprint was the exact size my brother wore when he vanished at 17. Same width, same worn tread pattern along the heel. I remembered it too well from mornings he'd leave mud prints in the kitchen after sneaking in past curfew. I used to tease him about how heavy he walked, but the other print? The other was a nightmare dragged into the world, longer than my forearm, deep enough to compress stones, too wide, too split, too articulate. No claws, no pads, just pressure points, like knuckles digging into the earth, something walking on limbs too long to be natural. Something that didn't evolve to walk above ground, but had learned. The two prints trailed side by side toward the narrow crawl space under the collapsed entrance. My breath came shallow. My throat felt sandpaper dry. For a moment, God help me, I considered calling out my brother's name. I felt it rising in my chest, that instinct older than fear. But something deeper stopped me. A memory. A warning. The memory of the thing on the bridge using his voice. Imitating him. Learning him. If I spoke his name here, something would answer. And I wasn't ready to hear what voice it would use. I edged toward the opening, crouching low. The air that spilled out was colder now. Too cold. The kind of cold that exists deep underground where light hasn't reached for centuries. It smelled of rust, wet stone, and something faintly organic, like fur left to rot in a sealed chamber. My flashlight beam stretched inside only a few feet before dissolving into black static. The darkness ate the light, not gradually, but instantly. Behind me, the forest made a sound I'd never heard before. Trees straining, not wind, not weight, straining. Like dozens of trunks bending under force, limbs pulled taut, wood fibers tearing one by one under immense pressure, I turned. The tree lines stood unnaturally still. But the trees weren't upright anymore. They leaned. All of them. Tilted toward the restricted zone like a field of tall grass bending toward heat. Their shadows stretched forward, merging into a single mass that spilled toward the fence. The ground beneath my boots trembled once, the same subterranean movement I'd felt all day. Then again, closer. A third time, even closer, the soil shifting slightly under my toes like something was surfacing just beneath the layer of roots and stone. Whatever hunted me all day had followed me here, driven me here. The mine wasn't a refuge. It was where it wanted me. I crouched lower and forced myself toward the crawl space. The choice wasn't between danger and safety. It was between being taken above ground or taken below. But one truth rang clearer than fear. The thing outside preferred the forest. It moved with confidence there. It knew every tree, every shadow, every root. The tunnels, though, maybe down there it was slower. Maybe. The trembling behind me intensified, then stopped. Silence. My own heart slammed like it wanted to tear out of my ribs. Sweat dripped down my spine despite the cold air curling from the tunnel. Then, a single tap echoed behind me, 1, followed by 3, then 5. The inverse of the original pattern, not a call, not a lure, a countdown. I swallowed hard and dropped onto my stomach, pushing my pack through the narrow gap first. Cold stone pressed against my chest as I crawled under the collapsed rock, gravel biting into my palms. The darkness ahead swallowed me piece by piece, legs, waist, ribs, until only my head remained in the open air. I hesitated 1 second too long. Behind me, the ground ruptured. Not split, ruptured. Soil exploded upward in a spray of roots and dirt as something massive pushed through the surface. A groan rolled through the forest like a beast forcing itself out of a grave. I didn't look. I dragged myself in the last few inches, like feeling the world behind me sag inward as something enormous slammed down exactly where I'd been laying. The impact shuddered through the collapsed stone, sending dust showering over my back. For a moment the gap glowed faintly with reflected moonlight, and a shadow fell across it. Too tall, too broad, arms long enough to touch the ground without bending. The silhouette lowered to look inside, its head tilting unnaturally as it peered into the crawl space. It exhaled. Warm air, thick with sulfur and wet fur, rushed over my face. I pressed myself deeper into the tunnel until the rock scraped my shoulders raw. The silhouette lingered a moment, watching, breathing, then rose slowly. The tapping resumed. 5, 3, 1. But now the sound was duller, muted by stone and soil. For the first time it sounded frustrated, or patient. I crawled deeper until the beam of my flashlight finally cut through the dark. The tunnel widened abruptly, opening into an old maintenance corridor. Rusted rails gleamed faintly in the beam. Water dripped rhythmically from overhead, echoing through the darkness like a heartbeat. I pulled myself fully inside and sat up, chest heaving. To my left, the tunnel stretched into total darkness. To my right, something glinted on the ground. Metal. An old lantern. Bent and rusted, but unmistakable. Beside it lay a shoe. A teenager's shoe. Caked in old dust. I picked it up with shaking hands. Size 11, my brother's size. My vision blurred. For a second, my brain split in two. Half screaming denial, half whispering confirmation I'd never wanted. My stomach twisted so violently I nearly vomited. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not behind me, in front of me, deeper down the tunnel. Slow, hollow, echoing off stone walls. Human, or perfectly human sounding. Hello, a voice called faintly. A boy's voice. My throat closed. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Is someone there? The voice echoed again. It was him. My brother. No distortion, no mimicry, just him. The footsteps came closer. I stumbled backward as a figure emerged into the edge of my beam, a silhouette of a teenage boy. Same height, same build, same messy hair. His clothes were torn and dusted with mineral powder. His face was half in shadow. Hale, he whispered. He said my name. Not my first name. Not my last name. My nickname, the one only my brother used. I felt something inside me break open, something raw and desperate I'd buried for years. But then the figure's shadow moved wrong. It stretched too far behind him. Too many limbs, too many angles. The boy stepped forward. The shadow didn't match, and then the boy smiled. Wide. Too wide. Wrong. I found it, he whispered. I found where it lives. My stomach plummeted, his voice layered, just barely. A second tone underneath, a resonance. The same depth as the cave, as the thing in the soil. I raised my flashlight fully. His face was wrong. Skin too smooth, eyes too dark, mouth too stretched. And behind him, deeper down the tunnel, something shifted, a shape tall enough to bend the ceiling. The boy's head twitched sideways, body stuttering like a puppet pulled by strings. It wants you, he whispered. Something huge inhaled behind him, the air rushing through the tunnel. Come down. The tunnel ceiling groaned. The rails vibrated under my boots. The boy stepped closer. The tall shape behind him lowered itself, bones cracking like distant thunder. I turned. I ran. I didn't look back. Not when the tunnel shook. Not when the voice called my name. Not when something scraped the stone just feet behind me, its breath hot on my neck. I squeezed through the crawl space, ripping my clothes, my skin. I burst into the open night air and sprinted without direction, branches whipping my face, the forest screaming around me. I didn't stop running until the ground no longer vibrated and the trees no longer leaned inward, and even then the smell of sulfur clung to me. Burnt hair lingered in my nose, and the whisper, "Come down," still echoed in my skull. Some nights I wake up thinking I'm still in the tunnel. Some nights I hear the tapping beneath my bed. 5, 3, 1. Some nights, the soil outside my cabin bulges. And sometimes I hear my brother's voice calling my name from the tree line. The wilderness keeps secrets. Some of them crawl, some of them mimic, some of them wait, and some never stop following me out. I've spent most of my adult life believing that the woods were the only place where I truly made sense. But the night I learned my mind could betray me more effectively than anything lurking beyond the tree line, I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. The forest doesn't protect you just because you love it. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it listens, and sometimes, if you're not careful, it remembers. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 38 years old, 8 years deep into my career as a forest ranger in Washington's Cascades, and I've always thought of myself as the calm voice when things go wrong. Lost hikers, injured hunters, overdue campers, those were the problems I knew how to solve, the ones that fit neatly inside forms and reports. The problems with names, but the stories that stayed with me, the ones I never wrote down, were the ones without names, the ones I'm going to share now. I've kept them buried for years, locked in a drive in my desk drawer, a drive that failed last month when I finally decided to look back at everything I'd documented, every video, every audio log, every note. All of it turned into a mess of static and corrupted files, except for one, A 10-second clip at the very end. A 10-second clip that shouldn't exist because I never recorded it. A clip that made me realize I've been running from something I don't fully understand. And before I can tell you what those last 10 seconds show, you need to understand the years that came before them. The encounters that chipped away at my certainty piece by piece until there was nothing left to hold on to. I started as most rangers do, naive, idealistic, hungry to prove myself useful. Our district bordered a vast area of old-growth forest that locals treated with a kind of reverence I didn't understand at first. They talked about that land the way you talk about a person, like it had moods, memories, grudges. I wasn't raised superstitious, and even now I wouldn't call myself that. But I've learned to respect the things you feel long before you see. The way the air thickens before a storm. The sudden hush that falls over a trail with no wind and no reason. The weight of being watched when you know damn well no one's supposed to be out there. I felt it for the first time on a search and assist call my second year. A local named Everett had reported strange knocking outside his cabin at night. 3 knocks spaced evenly, like someone rapping on a door. Only he didn't have a front door. Not really, just an old screen and a curtain. He also lived alone, 10 miles off the main road. People like Everett didn't call for help unless something was seriously wrong. When I arrived, he was sitting on the porch steps with a shotgun across his knees and a kind of hollow dread in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He wasn't scared of animals, not wolves or cougars or anything that had a natural reason to be out there. He'd lived with those his whole life. Something else had gotten into his head. He told me the knocking always came after midnight, when everything was still. 3 knocks. Always the same rhythm. And when he stepped outside with his light, he said the forest looked different, like the trees were closer, their silhouettes shifted, leaning toward him. I didn't believe that part, not then. I blamed stress, fatigue, maybe isolation messing with his perception. I checked around the property expecting to find the usual, branches falling, raccoons prowling, maybe even a bear testing boundaries. And for a while, everything looked normal. Quiet. Too quiet. I remember the sound of my own boots in the frost, the weight of my breathing hanging in the night air. The forest around me felt compressed somehow, like everything was holding its breath. A stillness so complete, it felt intentional. I circled to the back of the cabin, and that's when I saw them. Tracks. But they weren't tracks I recognized. Not quite human, not quite animal, something that sat in the uncanny middle, where instinct tells you to stop rationalizing. Long, narrow impressions, and splayed in a way that didn't match any natural gait, each print pressed deeper than the snow around it, as if the ground had softened beneath it. I remember kneeling down, shining my light across the pattern, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. They weren't footprints, not exactly. They were suggestions of feet, like something had imitated the shape but didn't understand how to fully replicate it. And the stride was wrong, too long for a human, too exact for an animal, each step the same distance apart. Everett came out behind me, muttering that the knocking didn't just come from the cabin walls. It sometimes came from the tree line. That was the moment something shifted in me. The moment I stopped looking for explanations and started paying attention. Because while I was crouched there staring at those prints, the air around us changed. The temperature dropped so fast it made my breath pulse like smoke. Everett's dog, who'd been silent since I arrived, started whimpering in the cabin doorway, low and fearful, the kind of sound that comes from deep in the gut. And then we heard it. 3 knocks, but not on the cabin. They came from the woods behind us, spaced perfectly, deliberate like a signal or a call. Not echoing, originating, close, too close. I lifted my light, sweeping across the tree line, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw something between the trunks. Something tall, something pale, something that stepped back the instant the beam touched it, as if it wasn't retreating but resubmerging into the darkness. I froze. Everett grabbed my sleeve. The dog's whimper became a sharp, terrified bark. 3 knocks again, deeper now, more forceful, as if whatever made the sound wanted us to know it wasn't afraid of being heard. I've replayed that sound in my mind more times than I can count. It wasn't wood on wood, it wasn't stone, it wasn't anything natural. It was smooth, hollow, resonant, like knuckles on a door. But there was no door out there. I reported it, documented everything. That video was one of the ones that got corrupted. All of them did. Years of footage, logs, photos destroyed, except for the last 10 seconds at the very end. But that night, standing beside a shaking old man and a dog that wanted to crawl out of its own skin, all I knew was that something was wrong. Something was watching us with a patience that felt predatory. Something that didn't give chase, didn't roar, didn't charge. It just knocked, it waited, and it learned. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. Everett moved into town within the week and never went back to his cabin. He told me the forest changed after that night, that it wasn't the same place he'd grown up in, and maybe he was right. Maybe the land didn't change, maybe we did. And that was only the first time I felt it watching me. For months after that night with Everett, I carried the memory of those knocks like a weight in my pack. I didn't talk about it with the other rangers. It wasn't fear of being mocked, it was fear of naming something I didn't understand. Saying it out loud felt like giving it a shape it didn't yet have, like helping it become more real. So I stayed quiet, and the woods stayed quiet, and for a while that uneasy truce worked. I focused on the job, trail checks, visitor reports, the endless rotation of seasonal tasks that made me feel grounded again. But the stillness didn't last. It began with a missing hiker. Not unusual on its own, we lose people every year. Some wander off trail, some get hurt, some panic and walk the wrong direction until exhaustion forces their hand. But this one was different. His name was Rowan, a 46-year-old wildlife photographer with decades of experience in backcountry terrain. He wasn't careless or unprepared. He knew the mountains better than most of us. But when he failed to check in after a 3-day solo trek, we launched a search. I expected to find a twisted ankle, maybe a broken leg, ordinary problems, something I could fix. Instead, we found his tent, or what was left of it. The campsite lay deep in an old-growth section rarely visited even by seasoned hikers. Towering Douglas firs, moss so thick it swallowed your boots, a canopy so dense it muted the sunlight into a perpetual dusk. When we approached the clearing, something felt off before I saw anything. The air smelled wrong, sweet, metallic, like sap mixed with rust, the kind of smell that makes your instincts rise before your mind catches up. Then I saw the tent. It wasn't torn. It wasn't crushed. It looked rearranged, as if someone had dismantled it slowly, piece by piece, and then attempted to put it back together without understanding how the structure worked. The poles were inserted backwards. The rainfly was on the ground, staked taut as if it were the tent floor. His pack sat upright in the center, zipped perfectly. Too perfectly. Inside were his food, his maps, his emergency beacon, all untouched. But there was one detail that still crawls under my skin. His camera lay on the folded sleeping bag, powered off, lens cap on. But the lens cap was scratched in 3 straight lines, perfectly parallel, each about an inch long. Not claw marks, not from a fall. Deliberate. We spread out to search. 2 rangers went west, another south. I went north, deeper into the dark heart of that forest. I walked slowly, scanning for tracks, broken limbs, anything. Instead, I found silence. Complete, unnatural silence. Even my radio crackled with static, something that almost never happens that deep in the range. I remember looking down at the moss under my boots. It was undisturbed, like no one had walked there in years. But I could feel eyes on me, a prickling sensation at the base of my neck, cold and sharp, like a drop of melting snow sliding down my spine. I turned, expecting to see a bear or a cougar watching from a distance. Nothing. And then I heard the whisper. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. It sounded like wind passing through a narrow crack in stone, except there was no wind. Just a soft, breath-like tremor, a rustle that felt intentional, like someone exhaling just behind my ear. I spun around so fast I nearly slipped on the moss. Still nothing. Just the feeling of a presence that didn't want to be seen. only felt. Something inside me told me to leave, not run. Leave, quietly, calmly, like backing away from a ledge you didn't realize you were standing on. I took 3 steps and the whisper came again, this time from my right, a soft dragging sound, like fingertips trailing across bark. I swept my flashlight through the shadows, and for a fraction of a second I saw movement, a pale shape shifting behind a fallen cedar, too tall for a person, too smooth, no fur, no clothes. Just a vertical motion that slid back into the darkness with fluidity that made my stomach twist. I didn't chase it. I should have radioed the team immediately, but I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Something about acknowledging it out loud felt dangerous. Instead, I took a long breath and moved back toward camp, forcing my steps slow, even, controlled. When we regrouped, the others looked shaken, but said nothing unusual had happened in their quadrants. No tracks, no debris, no sign of Rowan. It was as if he'd been plucked out of the forest without leaving a trace. We searched for 2 more days before the call came down to suspend operations. I didn't say a word about the whisper, or the pale shape, or the smell. But when I got home, I documented everything onto a drive. Every detail, every emotion, every instinct. I filmed voice memos, typed field notes, even sketched what I thought I saw. And those were among the earliest files that later turned to static. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. The next incident happened in late autumn when the temperatures dropped and the woods thinned out with the season. It was around then I began noticing a pattern. The strange events always escalated when I was alone. When the daylight was thin. When the forest held its breath in that uncanny way I was beginning to recognize. I'd been assigned a solo overnight patrol near a series of limestone caves known for attracting reckless teenagers. I hated those caves even before everything that followed. The forest changes around them. The sound feels different. Too sharp, too echoing, like every footstep belongs to someone else. That night, the temperature was dropping fast. A cold that didn't feel natural for the season, as if it were seeping from the ground itself. I'd set up my small ranger shelter near the trail junction, brewed some coffee, and wrote a brief report while the sky bled into twilight. I told myself it would be an uneventful night. I didn't believe it. Around 1 a.m, something woke me. A vibration, subtle but real. It felt like a low hum moving through the ground, through the shelter floor, through my ribs. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. Then came the sound. A distant knock. Not like Everett's knocking. This was deeper, slower, resonant, like something striking the earth itself. 1 knock. Then silence. 20 seconds later, another knock. I stepped outside, breath fogging in the cold. The trees stood motionless, but the air felt tight again, compressed. I swung my light toward the caves. The beam hit the nearest opening, and something inside reflected, not eyes, not metal, something flat, pale, retreating deeper as soon as the light touched it. My chest tightened. The cold air tasted metallic, like biting into winter steel. The ground hummed beneath my boots. Then the knocking started again, louder this time, not from the caves but from the trees behind me. 3 knocks, deliberate. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. Far between the trunks, half hidden in shadow, stood a shape too tall to be a person, too narrow to be a bear. Its silhouette so still and upright it made every instinct inside me recoil. I lifted my light, and the shape slipped back as if melting into the darkness. Not stepping, slipping. My breath hitched. My pulse hammered against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The knocking came again, this time from both directions. My throat tightened with the kind of dread you don't outrun, only endure. I forced myself back into the shelter, locked the door, and sat motionless in the dark, listening to the knocks closing in until they were just outside the thin nylon walls, each one spaced with perfect precision, like a countdown. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, there were no tracks, no marks, no sounds, just silence and frost and the memory of a presence that knew exactly where I was. When I returned from that patrol near the caves, I didn't tell anyone what happened. I wrote the official report the way I always did. Sterile, factual, stripped down to the kind of language that made sense on paper. Temperature, 31 degrees. Wildlife movement, minimal. Human presence, none observed. All true and all meaningless. The truth stayed locked inside my head and later inside that drive. But the fear didn't fade this time. It clung to the inside of my ribs like something trapped there. I'd catch myself staring at the tree line whenever I was alone, waiting for a shape I hoped I wouldn't see. I'd wake up at night to phantom knocks I couldn't tell were memory or dream. It got to the point where I started volunteering for more team patrols, not because I needed help, but because I needed company. I needed witnesses. Someone else to confirm the forest was as quiet as it seemed. For a while, it worked. Winter settled in, the snow softened everything, and the woods grew still in the honest, natural way they do that time of year. There were no whispers, no knocks, no pale shapes sliding through the dark. I fooled myself into thinking whatever I'd encountered had moved on, that maybe it was tied to the caves or to a specific stretch of land, something territorial, something rooted. But the forest has its own timing, its own patience, and it was only waiting for the right moment to show me something worse. The call that finally broke me came in late February after a heavy snowfall. A young couple had gone missing while snowshoeing along one of our mid-elevation trails. Their last GPS ping showed them at a small ridgeline overlooking a valley thick with old growth, a beautiful area in summer, but unforgiving in winter. We formed a search team of 5, loaded with thermal gear and avalanche equipment, and set out before dawn. I felt something wrong almost immediately. The snow wasn't behaving the way it should. There were strange pockets where it felt softer beneath the top crust, like something had disturbed it from below. Animal burrows, maybe, but too large, too irregular. I kept those thoughts to myself and stayed focused. We reached the ridge by mid-afternoon. Their tracks were easy to find at first, 2 sets of snowshoe imprints running parallel, crisp and clear. They led straight to the overlook. But what struck all of us was how the tracks ended. They didn't turn back. They didn't wander. They didn't lead to a fall or a break in the snow. They simply stopped, just 15 feet from the tree line, as if the 2 people had walked into the open air and vanished. The others started theorizing immediately. Wind drift, a partial collapse of the snow shelf, disorientation leading them off trail. All logical, all false. I didn't say anything, but my stomach dropped when I stepped closer and knelt down to examine the final impressions. The edges were wrong, not rounded the way snowshoe prints normally soften over time. These edges were crisp, sharp, and too deep, as if something had pressed down on top of the original prints after they'd been made, like something had followed them, or watched them, or stood over the prints after the couple disappeared. I rose slowly, looking out at the dense wall of trees ahead. The forest was silent, again, unnaturally so. Even the wind sounded muted. I told myself I was imagining it, but I felt eyes on us. Several pairs, maybe, watching from between the trunks. We split into pairs to search the perimeter. I partnered with a younger ranger named Tolbert. Good kid, terrible poker face. After 15 minutes, he admitted he felt sick to his stomach, like the air had gone stale. I didn't tell him I felt the same. We were circling the tree line when I noticed something that made me stop mid-step. A branch, 8 feet high, had been stripped clean of needles. Not snapped. Not clawed. Stripped. Peeled back with surgical precision, leaving the wood exposed and smooth. And there were more ahead. 3, 4, 5 trees marked higher than any animal in the region could reach. Tolbert saw them too. His face went pale beneath his balaclava. He whispered, barely audible, asking what kind of creature could do that. I didn't answer. We radioed the others to regroup, but before they responded, we heard it. A low, rhythmic clicking sound coming from deep within the trees. Not loud, just intentional, measured, almost like someone tapping their fingernails on a hollow surface. Slow at first, then slightly faster, then stopping altogether. Tolbert froze. I swept my light through the trees, but the beam could only push so far into that packed darkness. Something moved between the trunks, high up, far too high for a person, a pale shimmer above the branches, there for less than a heartbeat. I stepped back, pulse hammering, breath clouding the air. My instincts were screaming at me to return to open ground, to get the team out. Then the clicking started again, closer this time. Tolbert whispered for us to leave. I nodded. We began walking backward toward the ridge, keeping our lights trained ahead. Then the radio crackled. Static. Then a voice. But it wasn't any of our team. It was wrong. Too low. Too slow. The cadence was uneven, like someone trying to imitate speech without understanding how to shape the sounds. The voice slid between vowels, echoing faintly. Mar-cus. I went cold. Tolbert stared at me, eyes wide above his mask. The voice continued, stretching my name into something distorted, hollow, breathless. Mar-cus. And then, come back. Those words didn't make sense at first. Come back to what? The others? The prince? The ridge? I didn't understand. Then I realized the voice wasn't calling us back. It was telling me I'd already come too close. Something shifted in the darkness. A pale arm, long, impossibly long, slid between two tree trunks, withdrawing just as quickly, as if testing how close it could get without fully revealing itself. Tolbert bolted. I chased after him, my boots punching through the snow as the clicking sound rose behind us. Not frantic, not chaotic, but steady, matching our pace like a metronome keeping time. When we reached the ridge, the others were already there, confused by our panic. But before we could explain, the clicking stopped. The forest fell silent, completely silent. And then the wind changed. A warm gust blew across the snow, carrying a smell I still can't describe without feeling sick. Like wet stone, like old caves. Like breath from something that had been asleep too long. The others grew quiet. Then uneasy, then afraid. We left the ridge with speed we didn't bother hiding. The couple was never found. Back at headquarters, I reviewed the footage from my body camera. All of it had recorded fine until the moment the clicking started. Then the audio warped, the video blurred, and the file ended abruptly. Corrupted. Every attempt to recover it resulted in static. On the final frame, though, frozen mid-glitch, there was something in the background of the trees. A shape towering behind the trunks, nearly camouflaged by their shadows, long limbs, pale skin, eyes that reflected light in a way no human eyes should. That frame was one of the many lost to the corruption later, but I remember every pixel, every contour, every shadow, and even though I tried to file it away as stress or illusion or fear messing with memory, I couldn't deny what I felt when I looked at it. Recognition. Like whatever I saw had seen me before, like it remembered me, and like it wanted me to come back. After the ridge incident, something in me changed. Not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, like frost spreading across a window pane. I started noticing patterns in places I used to walk without thinking. The trees seemed arranged differently at times, angles shifting subtly like they were leaning in to listen. Sounds I once dismissed as branches settling or distant woodpeckers now carried an intelligence I couldn't shake. And through all of this, one truth ate at me. Whatever was out there knew my name. It had spoken it. It had shaped it with intent. That understanding alone put a fracture line straight through my sense of safety. I tried to bury myself in routine, taking on extra work, inventorying equipment, volunteering for trail maintenance crews, anything to keep my mind occupied. But the forest kept finding ways to remind me I hadn't imagined a thing. It started small at first, lights flickering in my cabin at night, soft thumps on the porch steps that never left tracks, radios chirping with static when no one else was broadcasting. Little reminders. Then came the dreams. At first, I dismissed them as stress, simple nightmares. But they began to repeat, always the same landscape, always the same progression. I would find myself walking through a narrow slot canyon carved from limestone, walls smooth as bone. The ground was damp beneath my boots, the air heavy and cold, carrying the smell of old water pooled in dark places. A sound would echo behind me, soft and rhythmic, like something tapping the canyon walls with a single long nail. Tap, tap, tap. And as I walked deeper, the canyon walls would begin to pulse, not with light, but with a subtle, sickening movement, like they were breathing. The dreams always ended the same way. I would reach a cavern lit by an unseen source, pale and shimmering, and in the center stood a tall, thin figure, its back turned to me, its skin the color of moonlit stone. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if each breath took effort. And then, just before I woke, it would tilt its head, not turn, just tilt, listening, recognizing the way an animal perks up when it hears a familiar voice. I told myself they were just dreams, but I knew they weren't, because they felt exactly like the breath I'd felt at the caves, exactly like the presence I'd sensed on the ridge, and each time I woke, I could still smell that same cold mineral scent clinging to the back of my throat. I should have taken time off. Any rational person would have, but rationality was becoming the first thing the forest took from me. And when another call came in, a distress signal from a solo ranger on the north side of the valley, I didn't hesitate. His message was short, clipped, nearly swallowed by static. Movement near the tree line, feeling watched, requesting backup. His voice carried a quiver I recognized instantly. The same one I'd tried to hide in my own reports. I drove out there alone. The sky was bruised purple when I reached the trailhead, the kind of deep winter dusk that smothers everything in half light. I parked the truck, grabbed my radio, and started up the slope. The snow was thinner here, patchy, revealing dark soil and slick roots beneath. The pines above clattered softly in the breeze. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed the trees. They were spaced too evenly. Not planted, not groomed, just unnaturally uniform. Each trunk the same width, the same lean. The same angle toward the trail as if they'd been arranged by some meticulous hand. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I pressed onward. Half a mile in, I found the ranger's pack in the middle of the trail. Upright, zipped perfectly, snow dusted over its top but no prints around it. A familiar arrangement, too familiar. My heart thudded in my chest as I circled it, scanning the area. I called his name. Silence answered. I clicked the radio. This is Hale. I'm on site. I found his pack, no visual on him yet. Only static came through. Then from somewhere deeper in the woods came a sound that jolted every nerve in my body. A long, low exhale. Not human, not animal. A breath made by something with a chest too large and lungs too deep. A sound that vibrated the air more than it traveled through it. I drew my flashlight and swept it across the trees. For a moment, the world looked normal. Then the beam passed over a patch of bark where thin gouges marked the trunk, long, straight, parallel scratches, higher than any bear could reach, higher than any ladderless person could manage. I stepped closer. The gouges were fresh. The wood beneath was pale and wet, sap dripping down like sweat. Then the exhale came again. Closer now. I turned. Something moved between the trees. Fast. Too fast. A pale blur, impossibly tall, vanishing behind a cluster of trunks before my light could catch it. My breath caught in my throat. The flashlight trembled in my hand. I called for the ranger again. My voice cracked. Another sound responded, but this one wasn't the exhale. It was a shift, a heavy step breaking crusted snow. Then another. A slow, deliberate cadence approaching from the left. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but I forced myself forward toward the sound. Half bravery, half stupidity. The steps grew louder, then stopped. I scanned the trees in a slow arc. At first, I saw nothing. Then, 50 feet out, I noticed a break in the pattern of trunks, a narrow shape standing too still, too straight. My light hovered there. The thing stood half hidden behind a tree, tall enough that its head almost brushed the lower branches. Its skin, if it was skin, was pale, smooth, and cold-looking, like polished river stone. One long arm clung to the trunk, fingers curled around it with unsettling delicacy. And then it leaned. Not stepped, not shifted. Leaned. Its torso moved at a strange angle, tilting out from behind the tree while its legs stayed rigidly in place. It was like watching a hinge open where a hinge shouldn't exist. Its head followed, emerging slowly into view. It didn't have clear facial features, not ones that made sense. But the shape where the eyes should have been caught the beam of my flashlight and reflected it back at me with a glossy, liquid shimmer. My knees nearly buckled. Then it opened its mouth. No teeth, no tongue, Just a dark, hollow cavity stretching too far, too wide. From inside came the softest sound. A whisper. Marcus. My vision blurred. My hands shook uncontrollably. The forest tilted. I stumbled back, tripping over a root hidden beneath the snow. My flashlight flew from my grip and landed at an angle, its beam slicing across the ground and illuminating something I hadn't seen before. Tracks. Not human. Not animal. Elongated impressions, narrow, deep, spaced in that same too-perfect stride I'd seen years ago behind Everett's cabin. They circled the trees, crisscrossed the trail, moved in and out of sight like a looping pattern, like something pacing. Waiting. I crawled backward, forcing my lungs to work, fumbling for my radio again. Static. Then a soft click. Then another. Slow. Rhythmic. The same metronomic clicking from the ridge, coming from behind me now. I spun around. Nothing there. I turned back. The figure was gone. No breath, no whisper, no movement, just the stillness of a forest pretending it had never held a monster. I don't remember running back to my truck, not really. The memory feels disjointed, like flashes of light and cold wind burning my face. But I remember one thing with perfect clarity. When I reached the parking lot and slammed the truck door, I heard a knock on the rear panel. 3 knocks. Even. Precise. Deliberate. I drove away without looking back. Later that night, when I reviewed my body camera footage, the video was corrupted, entire stretches replaced with static and warped frames. But the final seconds, the last 10 on the drive, were intact. And in those seconds, as I fled down the trail, the camera caught something behind me. Tall. Pale. Leaning out from behind the last tree as I ran, watching me leave. I kept my flashlight pointed toward the slope as I spoke into the radio, my voice lower than I meant it to be, like something in the dark was listening. I said my location twice, slowly, and waited for dispatch to answer. Static answered first, a crawling wave of it, like sand pouring over concrete. Then a voice broke through, faint, delayed, as if coming from far deeper than the repeater tower behind me. Ranger, copy, but your signal is distorted. I lifted the radio closer to my ear, turning slightly so my back wasn't facing the forest. I didn't want anything behind me. Say again, dispatch. Audio's breaking up. Silence. Then a grinding sound, like the radio was picking up something dragging against stone. I stepped back without meaning to, my heel catching on a root. The radio hissed, then the voice returned, but it wasn't dispatch anymore. It was breathing. Wet, heavy, thick, and much too close. I lowered the radio slowly, the way you lower anything you think might bite. The forest around me was still. No wind, no insects. The whole ridge felt staged, like the world had been paused, and I was the only thing still moving. I didn't call again. Whatever that was had come through on the same channel we use daily, and I didn't know if repeating my position would help the people I trusted or the thing listening in. I kept moving up the slope. The trail grew narrower the higher I climbed, bordered by jagged shale that slid underfoot. My boots scraped loudly, too loudly, bouncing off the trees and rocks around me. Every sound I made felt like a warning flare in the dark. And yet, something else was moving too. Not following me, not stalking, just shifting, adjusting, as if I wasn't the only one choosing where to place my feet. I reached a small clearing just large enough for 2 tents. Old fire ring, cold ashes, thick moss over half the stones. I'd been there once during training years ago and didn't like how little sunlight touched the ground. Even in summer, it stayed dim. Tonight, it was suffocating. A faint smell drifted up the ridge, earthy, but with something sharp underneath. Not rot, not animal scat, metallic, thick. The kind of scent that catches in your throat before your mind identifies what's wrong. Blood, fresh. I turned in a slow circle, squinting at the darkness. The smell was strongest toward the far side of the clearing. My beam found something there. Thin scratches on a tree trunk, about 6 feet up. Fresh, not deep, parallel. 4 of them. I'd seen bear marks all my life. These weren't bears. They were too narrow, too deliberate, and far too clean. I moved closer to inspect them, but another smell pushed past the metallic one, damp earth like a hole recently dug. I knelt and brushed away some pine needles. The soil was darker there, loose and wet, Something had been buried, or something had crawled out. A soft cracking sound snapped from the trees behind me, a branch under weight. My lungs froze, the air thickened. I didn't turn immediately. Turning too fast is a good way to slip, fall, or show fear. Instead, I stood slowly, pressing my palm against the trunk beside me for leverage. When I faced the sound, I expected to see a bear. Maybe a cougar. Maybe nothing at all. I didn't expect to see eyes. They were far back in the shadow between the trees, but the reflection was unmistakable, pale, almost silvery, set wider apart than any animal I knew. They blinked once, a slow, vertical shudder, like something adjusting to the beam of my light. But I hadn't aimed my flashlight at them. I had it lowered. Those eyes were catching only the spill of it. Whatever was back there was massive. My throat tightened, my body going still in that instinctive, ancient way the human species hasn't outgrown. That knowledge that something bigger, older, and more territorial has locked onto you. I didn't raise the light. I didn't speak. I just stepped backward until I felt the fire ring against the back of my boot. The eyes lowered, shifting, not disappearing, but moving down the slope toward the edge of the clearing. I heard the soil crumbling under its weight. No heavy footfalls, just pressure, controlled, almost calculated, like it knew exactly how to move without revealing itself. My heart hit harder and faster, the way it does when your mind catches up to your body and realizes you're outmatched. I whispered, barely audible, "Not tonight." Another sound came from the ridge below, not from the creature, but from the forest itself. A howl. But not wolf, not coyote, not anything I'd heard in 27 years on that land. It was long, low, hollow, and it vibrated through the clearing like something calling from inside a cavern. The eyes turned toward the howl, then back toward me. Then the creature stepped back into the dark, vanishing between the trees so smoothly you'd think it had never been there. I exhaled in a loud, shaking breath. My knees felt soft, my boots felt too light, and the forest suddenly felt too big. I should have left right then, descended the ridge, reported what I saw, and let the next ranger write the incident report. But fear isn't always a deterrent. Sometimes it's a hook. Sometimes it pulls you deeper, the way grief does, or anger, or curiosity you mistake for duty. I followed the smell of blood. Not down the slope where the creature had moved, but upward, where the scent seemed strongest. The trail narrowed again, hugging a cliff that overlooked a dark ravine. My light skimmed over jagged rock and patches of snow still clinging stubbornly to the shadowed wall. The farther I went, the colder the air grew. Not mountain cold, cavern cold. The kind that doesn't touch your skin first, but your bones. At the top of the ridge, the trees thinned enough to let me see it. A gap in the rock, low and wide, like a mouth frozen mid-breath. The cave. One of the caves locals refused to talk about. The one I'd once written off as superstition because every ranger hears stories like that. Holes in the earth where people vanish, tunnels where voices echo without source, places animals avoid without ever being taught why. This one didn't feel like a superstition now. The smell hit me first. Stronger, thicker. Blood, yes, but mixed with something else. Fur, sweat, cold stone, and a faint, almost electric tang, like air before a lightning strike. I aimed my flashlight inside. The first 10 feet were empty. Smooth rock, patches of old moss, animal tracks I didn't recognize. Then the beam caught on something at the back wall. Something dragged, something large, a shape slumped against stone, a backpack. The missing hiker's backpack. My stomach dropped so fast I had to steady myself on the wall. I stepped inside. 2 steps. 3. My light shook over the rocks until it landed on the rest of him. He was sitting upright, head tilted, eyes open, and his mouth was twisted as though he'd been about to scream. I crouched in front of him, swallowing hard, trying not to breathe in too deeply. His skin was pale blue, lips cracked, clothing torn across the chest. But the strangest part wasn't what was missing. It was what was left. There were no claw marks, no bite wounds, no broken bones, just a single smear of dark blood across the side of his neck and a look of pure, frozen terror. I touched 2 fingers to his wrist. Cold. Solid. Hours gone. But his expression, it looked like he'd seen something in the cave he tried to run from but couldn't. Like his last moment wasn't pain, it was recognition. As I stepped back, my boot knocked something loose, a small device half buried under a rock. I bent down, opened my palm, and brushed it off. A GoPro. The light blinked twice, then died. I pressed the side button. Nothing. I shook it once, held it up to the flashlight, and saw something smeared across the lens. I wiped it clean. The screen lit for exactly 10 seconds. The video didn't play, but the audio did. And what I heard wasn't human. The device shut off, the last seconds frozen in my hand, the final 10 seconds of footage still trapped inside it. And outside the cave, something began to breathe. Slow, heavy, deep enough that dust drifted from the cave ceiling and landed softly at my feet. I wasn't alone anymore. The sound of that breathing filled the cave so completely that for a moment I couldn't tell if it was behind me or in front of me or above me. It was as if the rock itself had lungs, as if the entire ridge was inhaling. I tightened my grip on the flashlight until my knuckles ached. My throat dried so suddenly it felt like swallowing sand. That breathing wasn't wind. It wasn't echo. It was deliberate, measured, patient. And it wasn't rushing me. It was waiting. I moved the beam slowly toward the entrance, my hand trembling enough that the light shivered across the stone walls in broken arcs. The cave mouth was still there, but the night outside seemed darker than before, like the forest had gathered around the opening and pressed its weight against it. The air thickened with another scent, warm, earthy, musky, like wet fur matted with dirt and cold air trapped too long underground. I took one step backward, deeper into the cave, because instinct told me that standing in the open would make me a target. But moving farther into a confined space with one exit wasn't smart either. Every ranger learns that. No single entry environments without backup. No caves, no tunnels, no mines. Darkness is a funnel. It gives the thing behind you the advantage. But I wasn't dealing with a rule book now. I was dealing with something that had already taken a man's life without touching him. The breathing deepened, low and resonant, vibrating through my boots. It wasn't approaching. It was expanding, like something massive was filling its chest, stretching against the stone. A fine dust drifted from a crack overhead. My flashlight beam wavered. I crouched beside the hiker's body again, not because I needed to see him, but because I needed something to anchor me. I whispered, barely audible, "What did you see?" The silence after that whisper felt wrong, like the cave swallowed the words instead of letting them fade. I lifted the GoPro again, pressing the power button until my thumb hurt. The screen flickered once, static, then black. I felt the cold plastic with my fingertips, the casing dented on one side, the lens scratched. Something had hit it. Something had hit it hard. My radio crackled suddenly, sharp enough to make me flinch. I grabbed it, my heart jumping to my throat. A voice broke through, but it wasn't dispatch. It wasn't a ranger. It wasn't human. It was a whisper. Long, stretched, unnatural. A warped imitation of speech, as if something had heard us talk and was trying to practice the shape of our words. "Go back." The voice twisted at the end, cracking into a low rumble that cut to static. The radio hissed, then went silent. I held it at arm's length, as though the voice might seep out of it again. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out everything else. That single phrase played over and over in my mind. Go back. Not get out. Not run. Go back. Go back where? Back down the ridge? Back into the cave? Back to some point I should never have crossed? I didn't get a chance to think about it because a shadow passed across the cave entrance, slow, deliberate, impossibly large. It blocked the faint starlight for a full second. Then another shape shifted behind it. The trees outside groaned under weight. They weren't built to support. Then all movement stopped. The breathing stopped. The forest outside held its breath with it. Silence settled so heavy that the cave felt sealed under earth. I lifted my flashlight and aimed it toward the entrance. Nothing. Just black. Not darkness. Black, like the light refused to penetrate it. I stepped forward slowly, feeling each shift of soil under my boots. When I reached the midpoint of the cave, a strange sensation crawled over the back of my neck. It wasn't cold. It wasn't heat. It was pressure, like invisible fingers brushing lightly along my spine. Not aggressive. Investigating. And then I understood. Something wasn't stopping me from leaving. Something was driving me deeper. I spun the flashlight toward the back of the cave again, the beam slicing across smooth rock until it hit something that shouldn't have been there. An opening. A narrow passage I hadn't noticed when I entered. It blended perfectly into the wall unless lit from a certain angle. A thin crack in the stone, wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The edges were worn smooth, not broken, not natural, used regularly. My stomach dropped. Whatever came out of this cave didn't come from the main entrance. I took a step toward that passage, not because I wanted to go inside it, but because something about it felt wrong in a way that demanded answers. The smell was stronger near it. Not blood, but something older, something like earth that had never been exposed to sun. I raised the flashlight toward the opening. A faint handprint marked the stone. Not human. Larger, wider. With 4 long fingers and a thumb that sat lower on the palm, almost too low, like a hinge adapted for strength, not dexterity. But the strangest part was the shape of the print. The center was indented, not outward, as if whatever made it pressed into the stone with enough force to deform it. I reached out without thinking, placing my human hand beside the impression. The size difference wasn't slight. It dwarfed my palm. My fingers didn't reach halfway up its length. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Not from fear, from realization. No bear did this. No man did this. No known animal did this. Behind me, gravel shifted, a soft, deliberate crunch. I spun, flashlight beam slicing across the cave floor in a blur, and caught the briefest glimpse of movement near the entrance. A silhouette, massive, broad, shoulders brushing the stone, something towering over me by what looked like 2 full feet. Then it retreated. Not fast, not startled, just waiting. Like it wanted me to see it. Like it wanted me to know how easily it could block the only exit if it chose. My throat tightened. I forced a slow breath, steadying the beam. The light trembled anyway. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. My voice didn't echo. The shadows seemed to lean closer. And then I heard it. Not breathing, not movement, but a sound like knuckles dragging lightly across stone. A scraping rhythm. Slow, deliberate. Coming not from the entrance, but from the narrow passage behind me. I turned with dread building in my chest. The sound stopped. The cave grew colder. I stepped backward automatically, the way anyone does when confronted with 2 threats at once, the body choosing distance even when the mind can't form a plan. My boot hit something soft. I froze. It was the hiker's leg. I stepped aside, the smell of stale sweat and cold skin hitting harder. My flashlight flicked with static interference. No reason, no explanation, just a flicker as though something unseen was brushing the beam. The GoPro pulsed once in my hand, a faint electric spark through the casing. I nearly dropped it. Then, without warning, the device powered on. No pressing of buttons. No signal from me. It turned on by itself. The screen lit with static snow, washed out, shaky, like a dying transmission fighting for life. Then the timestamp appeared, flickering numbers dancing at the bottom. The footage began mid-sound. A growl, but not an animal's. Not something meant for a throat or lungs. It was guttural and layered, like several voices overlapping in a frequency designed to unsettle whatever heard it. The video remained black, but the audio bled through. A footstep. Another. A whimper from the hiker. A whispered word, "Please." Then a new sound. Heavy breathing. The same pattern I had heard outside, but closer, so close it distorted the microphone. Then a scraping of nails against stone. Then silence. Finally, a single phrase, unmistakable even through the distortion. Go back. The screen froze. 10 seconds. Exactly 10 seconds. And when it stopped, the cave behind me exhaled, one long, cold breath rolling up the passage like a tide returning to shore. I turned toward it. Something moved in the dark. And this time, it was coming closer. I stepped back from the passage, my shoulders pressing against the cold stone wall, my pulse beating so loudly in my ears it felt like another presence in the cave. The scraping sound grew clearer, slow, heavy, deliberate, like claws or knuckles dragging over uneven rock. I lifted the flashlight, but the beam seemed to recoil from the narrow opening, as if the darkness inside it was thicker, heavier, swallowing the light instead of reflecting it. The air shifted, warmer now, pushing outward with each exhale from whatever was crawling toward me. I smelled it. Damp earth, old fur, the electric tang of cave stone cracked under pressure, and underneath all that, a scent that froze the muscles along my spine. Something human. Sweat. Skin. Fear. My fear. The thing coming toward me wasn't smelling the cave. It was smelling me. I forced a breath, shallow, quiet. The hiker's body sat motionless to my right, his open eyes staring into a corner of the cave as if he still saw something I couldn't. The GoPro screen, dead again, reflected my shaking light back at me in a faint, ghostly smear. I held it close to my chest like a piece of evidence I wasn't ready to surrender. The scraping stopped at the threshold of the passage. Silence poured into the cave like a tide withdrawn. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. Then, in the darkness of that cramped slit in the rock, two shapes formed. Round, pale, glinting. Eyes, not bright, not glowing, but wide-set, fixed unblinking on mine. Too high to be human, too forward-facing to be a bear. They hovered there, motionless, watching me with a stillness so absolute it felt ancient. Time stretched. My hand tightened around the flashlight. The thing in the passage inhaled deeply, pulling cold air past me, past the hiker, past the entrance, hasting the space. The temperature dropped so fast condensation formed on the metal casing of the GoPro. Those eyes blinked once, horizontal lids, not vertical like before. This was something else, or the same thing, showing me another part of itself. The creature shifted, and for a moment I saw the faintest suggestion of shape, something tall, narrow, with shoulders brushing rock, and an elongated silhouette that bent in places a human body couldn't. Then the darkness swallowed it again. A whisper drifted from the passage, so soft I almost mistook it for a trick of the airflow. Go back. Not through the radio, not from the GoPro, not echoed through the entrance. From inside the cave, directly from the throat of whatever stood only feet away. My skin tightened like it was shrinking around my bones. I took one step back, then another, moving toward the entrance without breaking eye contact. The creature didn't advance. It didn't withdraw. It just watched, like it was measuring me, like it was waiting to see if I understood. The forest outside was silent, but the silence was changing, deepening, thickening, as though the trees themselves were leaning closer again. My boots crunched on loose gravel. The cave seemed to breathe, the passage narrowing in my peripheral vision until it became nothing more than a slit of alive darkness. I whispered, "I'm leaving." My voice cracked. The eyes didn't move. I took another step and felt the cool night air brush my back. I kept the flashlight trained on the passage as long as the angle allowed. The creature stayed still. But then something else happened. Something so impossible my brain refused it at first. The hiker's head moved. Not a twitch. Not a slump. He turned slowly, painfully slowly, until he was looking straight at me. His jaw hung slightly open, his eyes clouded and lifeless, but his head was turned. My breath collapsed inside me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt rooted. The hiker's mouth opened wider, and the sound that came out was a dry, cracked rasp, not from a living throat, but from air forced through stiff vocal cords. Go back! The same phrase, the exact same cadence, the same distorted length at the end. The flashlight beam shook violently in my hand. I backed toward the entrance faster now, boots skidding over the cave floor. The hiker's body tilted forward just slightly, his eyes still fixed on mine. Something behind him shifted too, the creature pulling back just enough that I couldn't see the eyes anymore, only the void. A single stone rolled out of the passage and clinked on the ground. I turned. I stepped through the mouth of the cave. And the moment I crossed that threshold, the forest inhaled again, a deep, resonant breath that rustled the branches and stirred dead pine needles into swirling patterns around my boots. I moved quickly down the ridge, not daring to run, because every part of me knew that running from a predator is how you trigger the chase. My beam scanned the trees ahead, but my ears strained for anything behind me. For a while, there was nothing but my own footsteps and the thrum of my pulse. Then, somewhere far behind, from the direction of the cave, I heard a howl. Not animal, not human. Something layered, like two voices dragged across each other. One deep and resonant, one high and thin, both distorted by distance and stone. It echoed across the ridge, descending like a shiver through the treetops. I kept moving. Branches scraped my sleeves. Moss cushioned my steps. The night pressed close, but the darkness felt less heavy than the caves. Still, something stalked the edge of my hearing. Soft breaks of twigs, faint shuffles of weight. Something was following me, but not closing in. Pacing me. Guiding me down the ridge. I didn't understand why until I reached the old clearing with the fire ring again. The smell of blood still lingered, faint but present. The scratches on the tree glistened in my flashlight beam, and then I noticed something new. Tracks. Large ones. Deep. Leading from the cave and stopping at the edge of the clearing. Stopping exactly where I stood now. The shape was unmistakable. Bipedal, wide, with long strides that dented the soil inches deeper than any man could. But next to those prints were mine. Fresh. I knelt down, breath shaking, examining them. My boot prints followed a path straight up to the cave. But the creature's prints followed right beside each one. Every step I took tonight, it took with me. Not behind me. Not ahead. Beside, walking the ridge as I walked it, standing where I stood, watching the same things I watched. My throat tightened. I reached up and wiped cold sweat from my forehead. Then I saw it. Another detail, even more disturbing. My tracks ended in the clearing, but the creatures did not. They continued, down the ridge toward the forest below, following the path I was about to take, pacing me before I even moved. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry and bitter. It wasn't stalking me to attack. It was steering me, keeping me on a path, ensuring I didn't stray, ensuring I went back. I whispered into the trees, "Why me?" The forest didn't answer, but far below, in the direction the prince led, a distant echo came back. A low, rumbling growl, and something that almost sounded like my name. I don't know how long I knelt there beside my Volkswagen, hands buried in my hair, trying to understand what had just happened. The campground felt wrong now, airless, hollow, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was a lid being pressed over me. I finally forced myself to stand and shut the van door. The slam echoed too loudly in the dark. My headlights washed over the empty loop road, and for a moment I thought I saw movement near the tree line. Just a shape, or maybe the shadow of a shape, slipping behind a trunk. I blinked, wiped my face, looked again. Nothing. I kept telling myself I was just scared. Tired. Reacting to stress. That van life philosophy people love to preach. The wilderness is healing. It felt like a joke out here. The woods weren't healing. They were watching. I got back into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled forward slowly, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers hurt. I wasn't leaving the campground. Not yet. A part of me needed to prove that I hadn't imagined it all. I looped the van around the circle again, hungry for normalcy. Maybe another car, maybe a ranger, maybe a sign that the world still made sense. But every site I passed was empty. Even the site across from mine, where I'd seen the lights flickering earlier that evening, the one with the small teardrop trailer, and the couple who had been laughing around a fire when I first arrived. Their car was gone. Their trailer was gone. Not even tire tracks remained in the soft dirt. I slowed the van to a crawl. There was no way they'd left without me hearing an engine, not when the sound carried through the trees so easily earlier. I'd listened to the storms. I'd listened to the wildlife. I would have heard a trailer hitch clanking or a car pulling out. But the ground in their campsite was smooth, undisturbed, as if no one had been there at all. Something scraped against the passenger side door. I jerked the wheel and hit the brakes, breathing hard. The sound had been subtle, like fingertips dragging slowly along metal. I leaned across the seat and peered out the window, but the outside was just my headlights reflecting off the nearest tree. I rolled the window down a couple inches. Cold night air poured in. Nothing moved. But I could smell the forest, wet bark, pine needles, and underneath it, faint but unmistakable, something sour, like old sweat, like someone who had been walking too long without rest. I shut the window and kept driving. The campground map I'd memorized earlier showed an old service road branching off near the back of the loop. It technically led out of the park, but rangers used it more than visitors. I figured maybe I'd pass a ranger truck or someone doing rounds. Anything was better than this emptiness. When I reached the fork, I turned onto the narrow, unpaved road, letting the van climb the slow incline. My headlights bounced over ruts and roots. The forest here was denser, younger, the pines closer together. It felt like the road squeezed me inward. A few minutes later, my stomach sank. There was light ahead, a campfire burning low, and for one breath I felt relief. Human presence. Thank God. But the closer I got, the wronger it felt. The fire wasn't at a campsite. It was in the center of the road, just a ring of stones placed haphazardly on the dirt, flames licking up into the night. A shape sat beside it, still, back turned to me, wrapped in a hooded jacket. Too still. No movement at all, not even the subtle shift of someone warming their hands. I slowed to a stop, engine idling. The figure didn't react to the sound. I sat there, frozen, every instinct screaming to reverse and go back. But curiosity, fear, mixed with a desperate need to understand made me lean forward in my seat. "Hello?" I called out through the cracked window. Nothing. The figure didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't even breathe, as far as I could tell. My headlights threw its shadow long and sharp across the road. This was wrong. This was deeply wrong. Still, I inched the van forward until I was maybe 10 yards away. Close enough to see that the jacket the figure wore looked soaked, darkened from the elbows down, like the person had walked through a river, or bled. I couldn't make out their face beneath the hood, but their posture, rigid, straight-backed, made my skin crawl. They were listening, not to me, to something else. I shifted into reverse. The instant I did, the figure's head snapped up, not turned, snapped, a violent, jerking motion like something had yanked their chin toward the trees. And then, slowly, too slowly, they began to stand. I slammed my foot down and shot backward, gravel flying under the tires. The figure didn't chase me. They didn't move at all. They simply stood there, facing the dark line of trees, as if waiting for someone or something to step out. When I finally reached the fork again, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely steer. My breathing sounded too loud inside the cabin. I looked in the rearview mirror just once, and that was a mistake. Because even from a distance, I could still see the fire burning in the middle of the road. And the figure had turned. Now they were facing me. Not moving, just standing there in the glow of the flames, head tilted slightly, like they were curious, or recognizing me. I tore my eyes away and pushed the van harder, heading back toward my site because I didn't know where else to go. Leaving the area entirely seemed smart, but I was terrified of driving deeper into the forest in the dark. The paved road back to the highway was miles away. If something happened to the van out here, I'd be stranded. So I returned to the loop, to familiarity, even if it felt poisoned now. I parked the van at my site again and killed the engine. The sudden silence pressed in around me, colder than before. My thoughts tangled. Should I leave? Should I try to call someone? But there was no signal. There hadn't been for the last hour. I told myself I'd just rest for a moment. Think clearly. Maybe the figure was a lost hiker. Maybe the couple in the trailer had left quietly. Maybe everything had a rational explanation. But when I stepped out to breathe the night air, hoping it would settle me, I saw something that made every rational thought collapse. Footprints, dozens of them. They circled my campsite. They crossed behind my Volkswagen. They looped between these and around the fire ring. Bare footprints, wide, human, but somehow off. The toes too long, the heel too narrow, as though someone had walked in circles around my camp while I was gone. Watching, waiting. My legs felt weak, my throat tightened. I crouched down and touched one of the prints. The dirt inside was still soft, disturbed recently, very recently. And then I heard it. Not a growl, not footsteps, a whistle. Soft, low, rising and falling in a pattern that felt deliberate, like someone was signaling, communicating, and it was coming from the trees directly behind me. I stood slowly, heart hammering against my ribs, every nerve screaming to run, but my body locked in place. Something shifted in the darkness beyond the pines, just a silhouette, blending with the trunks, barely noticeable unless you knew to look. But I knew. It had been there longer than I realized, watching me, learning me. I backed toward the van, step by step, never breaking eye contact with that faint outline. The whistling continued, drifting between the trees like wind that didn't belong. I reached the driver's door and pulled it open. The whistling stopped. Silence swallowed everything. And then something answered from deeper in the woods. A second whistle, higher, shorter, like a reply. The first silhouette shifted, and another one appeared beside it, and another. I didn't wait to count. I dove into the van, slammed the door, and locked it. Hands trembling, breath coming in sharp bursts as I fumbled for the keys and prayed the engine wouldn't stall. I wasn't alone anymore. Something had come down from the hills, and it was multiplying. I should have reported what I saw that morning, but the moment I opened my mouth, the words felt like they didn't belong to me. They felt stolen, like something else was whispering them through my teeth. So instead, I swallowed the truth, nodded at my supervisor, and told him everything was quiet out there. That was the first lie I ever told in uniform, and the one that started everything that followed. I've been a ranger for 12 years. People think that means I love nature, that I feel at home in the trees. But the truth is, I chose this job because it's where she vanished. My sister, 19. A backpack half-zipped, a trail camera we found cracked open like something pressed its fingers inside. They called it a disappearance. I called it failure. I thought if I stayed here long enough, walked the same ground she walked, breathed the same cold air she breathed, maybe I'd understand what swallowed her. Maybe I'd feel it coming for me too. My therapist warned me that the forest wasn't a place to hunt memories, but she didn't know how they move through the pines like smoke. You don't need to chase them. They wrap around you. They whisper at the base of your skull. And when you're out on patrol alone, with only the wind and your heartbeat for company, the line between remembering and hallucinating gets thin enough to tear. That morning started normal enough. Frost on the truck windows, the scent of old coffee and wet canvas in the cab, a faint ringing in my ears from another night of insomnia. I headed out toward the northern boundary, restricted territory where the Park Service never answers questions directly. They just tell you to stay out unless you're sent. And that morning, they sent me. The silence up there always feels manufactured, like someone turned the world's sound down to a setting labeled experimental. Even the birds avoid it. No tracks, no scat, no movement. The air tastes metallic, like the edge of a battery on your tongue. The assignment was simple. Check a remote trail where a hiker claimed he heard voices underground. His report said the voices were pleading, crying for help, echoing up from beneath the soil. He said the ground felt warm beneath his hands, even though the temperature was below freezing. When dispatch told me that, I felt a pinch in my chest. Not fear, recognition. It was the same trail my sister took the morning she disappeared. The walk-in was quiet except for the crunch of frost under my boots. I followed the thin line of the trail until I reached the ravine. The earth had split there decades ago. Some blamed erosion, some the mining history, some something older. The crack ran deep into the ground, like the hillside had been cloven open by something patient. The first sign something was wrong was the smell. Not decay, not sulfur. It was wet hair, the smell you get when someone walks in the rain and doesn't towel off, too human to ignore, too out of place to rationalize. I crouched near the ravine and placed my hand on the soil. It vibrated, just barely, a humming so light it felt like it came from my bones instead of the ground. Then the whispering started. Not loud, not even distinct, more like hearing someone talk on the far side of a wall. Just movement of sound, shapes of phonemes. But there was one thing I recognized, a cadence, a familiar break in breath. The microscopic pause between syllables that only someone you've known your whole life would make. It sounded like her. I pressed my ear to the ground, my breath clouding above me. The soil was warm in the middle of winter. The voices grew clearer like they were rising toward me, not climbing, floating, as if lifted by a slow exhale. Help. That's what I thought I heard. Or maybe what I needed to hear. I slid down into the ravine without thinking. The walls were sheer and cold, but the moment my boots hit the bottom, I felt a wave of heat roll through the air like opening a door to a furnace. The light dimmed even though the sky above remained clear. My radio crackled with static. Then the ground shifted. Not much. Just enough that dust loosened and fell in a slow cascade. Something was breathing down there. Not air through lungs, too steady, too rhythmically precise. More like the entire ridge inhaled, expanding the earth around me, then exhaled in a long, low release. My hands trembled as I scanned the ravine's base with my flashlight. The beam landed on something pale, circular, half buried in the dirt. I brushed away the soil. It wasn't a rock, it was the corner of a metal panel. Old, rusted, unmarked. A hatch bolted shut with thick iron latches. The warmth was pouring from around its edges like a fever bleeding into the ground. And with the warmth came I still can't place. Sweet. Wrong. Like flowers blooming from rot. Then the whispers formed a shape, a single word. Please. I stumbled back, gripping the ravine wall. My breath came in ragged gasps, my vision narrowing. Every rational part of me said someone was inside. A survivor from the mining days, a lost hiker, a prankster, anything human. But the voice didn't sound human. It sounded like someone imitating humanity without understanding how vocal cords work. A puppet mimicking prayer. I touched the metal again. It pulsed beneath my palm, a slow rhythmic throb like a heartbeat. My sister used to sleep with her head on my arm during storms, and I'd feel that same gentle pulse. That memory tore through me, unexpected and sharp. Then something tapped back. 3 taps, slow, deliberate. I froze, my throat closed. I waited, another 3 taps. Not random, not desperate, communicating. I scrambled to the ladder rungs carved into the ravine wall and climbed out faster than I thought possible. The air grew colder as I reached the top. My radio hissed in my ear, then cut to silence. When I reached the truck, my hands were shaking so violently I dropped the keys twice before getting them in the ignition. I told no one, not because I didn't think it mattered, because I knew it did. Too much. And whatever was under that hatch already knew I was there. It already knew my voice. Maybe even my name. That night, I dreamed of the ravine. Except it wasn't winter. It wasn't cold. The trees bent inward like ribs. And the hatch was open. Wide. Something inside glowed, breathing slow, patient breaths like it had all the time in the world. I heard my sister calling from within, but her voice was warped, stretched like someone pulled her words apart with hooks. When I jolted awake, the cabin felt too humid, my skin damp, my breath clouding like the air was cycling between 2 seasons at once. For a moment, I thought I heard tapping beneath the floorboards. 3 slow taps, communication, recognition, memory. I sat in the dark until morning, unable to move. The next day, a call came in. Missing camper. Northern boundary. Last seen heading toward the ravine, and I knew before they finished reading his name. What waited beneath that hatch had whispered to someone else. I volunteered for the search before they even asked. Because if I didn't go back, I'd never know whether the voice I heard was hers, or something pretending to be her. Or something older learning how to speak through us, and because I was already afraid that whatever breathed beneath the soil wasn't calling for help, it was calling for company. They flew a helicopter in, even though they knew it wouldn't help. The canopy near the northern boundary swallows sound, light, everything. You can hover 20 feet above the trees and barely see the needles move. But protocol demanded air support, so the birds circled until the fuel calculations forced them back. On the ground, it was just us, 3 rangers and a local volunteer. They paired me with Sarah, a newer ranger, barely 2 years on the job. She still carried that quiet optimism that hadn't yet been scraped out by the job. Her smile always felt like an apology. That morning, she didn't smile. The cold hit hard, biting through our jackets. Frost clung to her eyelashes, and she kept looking north like she expected someone to be standing there. She didn't know about the hatch. No one did. I told myself that was the right call, the rational decision, the last thread of logic I still had. But as we hiked in, I could feel her watching me from the corner of her eye, trying to measure the thing I wasn't saying. The missing camper's name was Lewis, 36, amateur photographer. Last text to his brother said he'd found something strange on an unmarked trail. The timestamp was 2:13 a.m. No one sane hikes that late, not in winter, not near the northern boundary. The darkness up here is its own organism. I felt it close behind me, breathing down the back of my neck, long before I knew the hatch existed. We made it to the first clearing just after sunrise. Our breath hung low, clinging near the ground instead of drifting up. Temperature inversion. I've seen it a handful of times, but never this thick. I could barely see my boots through the fog of my own exhale. Sarah crouched, touching a patch of disturbed soil. Tracks, she said. Fresh. She was right. Boot prints, single file, heading toward the ravine. But there was something else, shallow impressions beside the footprints. Not paw prints, not claws. Smooth, elongated marks dragging lightly through the frost like fingers brushing the ground. Sarah didn't seem to notice, so I moved in front of them, stepping down on each one as casually as I could. "You okay?" she asked. "Cold?" I lied. We continued in silence until the trees thinned and the air grew unnaturally warm. The shift was instantaneous. One step freezing, the next breath thick like summer. My skin prickled with sweat under the jacket. Sarah tugged her collar. "This isn't right." Before I could answer, she stumbled, dropping to one knee, her hand pressing against her chest. "It feels hard to breathe." The air tasted metallic again, static against my tongue. My heart hammered. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I kept walking. I couldn't help it. The warmth pulled at me, drawing me in like gravity. When we reached the ravine, the heat hit us full force. Steam rose from the ground, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Sarah swore under her breath. "What the hell?" Her voice trailed off, because the hatch was open. Not fully, just enough that the corner lifted an inch off the ground. Enough for warm air to spill out in rhythmic pulses, each one carrying that same sweet rot smell that made my stomach tighten. Sarah stepped toward it. "Don't," I snapped, grabbing her arm. She flinched, startled. "It might be him." "It's not." I said it too quickly, too forcefully. She stared at me, confusion tightening her brow. "You've been here before." It wasn't a question. I opened my mouth, but before I could respond, a sound rose from the gap beneath the hatch. Not a voice. Not exactly. More like the echo of a voice pressed through metal. A low, drawn-out moan that didn't match any natural throat or human chest cavity. It vibrated the soil beneath our feet. Sarah stepped back, hand covering her mouth. Then it spoke. Not words, just sounds mimicking the rhythm of speech. The vocal pattern of a sentence without any actual meaning. It was trying, practicing, learning. The hatch vibrated as something pressed upward from underneath, straining against the metal. Dust cascaded down the edges. Heat surged in bursts, each stronger than the last. Sarah grabbed her radio. "Base, this is Delta Team. We found..." Static swallowed her transmission. My radio crackled too, not with static, but with faint tapping. 3 taps, 3 more. My lungs locked, my mouth went dry. Sarah looked at me. "Do you hear that?" I didn't answer, because the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by something far worse. A child's laugh. Faint, metallic, warped. Not coming from inside the hatch, but from the trees above us. Sarah turned in a slow circle, scanning the branches. "There's no one up there," she whispered. I felt the truth like a punch. Whatever made that sound wasn't perched in the branches. It was suspended in the air itself, a sound without a source, a memory replaying out loud. And it was her laugh. My sister's. I took a staggering step toward the hatch. The warmth intensified, wrapping around my ankles like invisible hands. Sweat rolled down my spine, my vision blurred at the edges. The breath coming through the gap below the hatch sped up, shorter inhales, quicker exhales. Anticipation. "Stop moving," Sarah said sharply. "You're walking toward it." I hadn't realized I was. The air shimmered again. The ground pulsed. A whisper rose from the gap, shaping itself into a familiar voice, my sister's voice, calling my name exactly the way she used to when she wanted me to come home. My knees gave out. I hit the dirt, hands shaking violently. "It's not real," I muttered. "It's not her. It's not her." Sarah crouched beside me. "Listen to me. You're overheating. We need to move back." But the whisper turned sharper, closer, like it was pressing against my ear. "Come down." The words carried a wet, snapping sound behind them, as if someone was moving a jaw that wasn't meant to articulate speech. A jaw made of something else, something that learned motion by tearing tendons. Sarah grabbed my arm to pull me up, but the ground shifted under us. The entire ridge inhaled, a massive, seismic breath, and the soil dipped beneath our boots. She screamed. Something pale and jointed emerged briefly in the gap beneath the hatch. Not a hand. Not exactly. Too many knuckles, too long. It slid upward, testing the space, tapping lightly against the metal. 3 taps. Slow, deliberate. Recognition. "Run, run," I croaked. "Sarah, run." But she already was, sprinting back through the trees, radio bouncing against her vest. I followed, weak, lungs burning from the sudden cold as the temperature plummeted behind us. Branches whipped my face. Frost returned instantly, forming on my eyelashes. My sweat froze inside my shirt. I didn't look back, because I could hear it behind us. Not footsteps. Not pursuit. Breathing. Steady. Measuring. Like it was mapping the cadence of my run, memorizing the rhythm of my panic. We didn't stop until we were a mile away, collapsing behind a fallen trunk. Sarah was shaking so hard her teeth clicked. I must have looked worse, because she kept staring at my face like she expected me to drop dead. "What was that?" she whispered. "What did we just see?" I opened my mouth, but the only sound I heard was the echo of my own voice, buried deep beneath the soil. 3 taps. "Please, come down." And it wasn't an echo at all. It was anticipation. Sarah insisted on filing the report as thermal anomaly, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't fooled by her own wording. She stayed late in the office that night, pacing, chewing through the end of her pen, starting and stopping sentences on her laptop like she was afraid the truth would leak into the document if she typed too fast. I watched her from across the room, the fluorescent lights flickering above us. They always flickered in that building, but that night, the rhythm of it felt intentional. Like something in the circuitry was breathing again. Slow. Patient. The other rangers eventually left. Doors closed, radios clicked off, even the hum of the heaters faded. Soon it was only the 2 of us, surrounded by filing cabinets stuffed with reports that never made it into official records. Sarah finally broke the silence. "You knew something was there," she said quietly. "Before we went out." I didn't answer. "You didn't act surprised. You didn't look confused. You looked." Her voice cracked. "You looked like someone remembering something." I stared at the wall, at the pinned map of the park, all the little red flags marking disappearances. The northern boundary had the highest cluster, 12 in 10 years. 4 marked as voluntary walk-offs. 2 ruled lost in weather, the others unresolved. My sister's marker was there too, a faint red pushpin, crooked like someone had jammed it in angrily. "It's been active," I said finally. My voice sounded like gravel in my throat. "For a long time." Sarah leaned back, arms crossed, but her hands kept trembling. "Active? What is it, exactly? A person? An animal?" "I don't know. You're lying." My jaw tensed. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't telling her everything. But how do you explain something that doesn't align with the human vocabulary? How do you describe the way the temperature shifts like breath, the way voices shape themselves out of soil vibrations, the way something beneath the earth learns you? "You heard it," I said. "You saw that hand." She slammed her palms on the desk. "That wasn't a hand." We both went still. because the way she said it, that wasn't a hand, wasn't denial. It was fear trying to reshape itself into something manageable. She swallowed hard. What do we do now? Before I could answer, the radio on the table crackled. A faint voice, male panting, cut through the static. Hello? Anyone? Anyone copy? Sarah grabbed the receiver instantly. This is Ranger Walters. Identify yourself. A long, trembling inhale. It's Lewis. I am hurt. I'm near a cave or something. I don't know how I got here. Sarah's eyes flew to mine. Her face went sheet white. Lewis, the missing camper. He was alive. At least the voice said it was him. Sarah pressed the button again, hands shaking. Lewis, stay calm. Can you describe where you are? Any landmarks? Any light? A scraping sound came through the speaker, something like fabric dragging over stone, then a low groan. Pain. Strain. I think I'm underground, he gasped. It's warm in here. Too warm. The breath left my lungs. Sarah whispered, no. But the radio wasn't done. Lewis continued, the sound growing stranger, more distant, warped around the edges like the signal was being bent, not blocked. There's something else down here. It's talking. It's talking like me. It knows my name. The room felt suddenly weightless, as if the floor had tilted. Sarah hit transmit. Lewis, keep talking. We're coming to you. Do you hear me? Stay awake. A pause. Then his voice dropped to a whisper, soft and hollow. I'm not alone. The radio clicked dead. We didn't waste time. We grabbed flashlights, emergency kits, thermal scanners, ropes, none of which would matter. We both knew that. But carrying equipment felt like pretending we still lived in a world where equipment could save a life. Outside, the night was wrong. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that crushes its own echo. The stars hung lower than normal, dimmer, like something in the sky had smudged them. Snow crunched beneath our boots as we hiked toward the northern boundary again. Sarah walked faster than she should have. Panic made her reckless. She kept whispering, he's alive, he's alive. Like if she said it enough times, the forest would agree. Halfway to the ravine, the temperature spiked again. 1 second freezing. The next, humid, oppressive heat. My breath came out as steam, then not at all. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead. I don't like this. Neither did I, but we kept moving. The warmth grew stronger with each step. The ground vibrated faintly, steady, rhythmic. Then we heard it, a voice echoing through the trees. Hello? Is someone there? Lewis, but not through the radio. From ahead. Sarah sprinted. Lewis! I grabbed her backpack, but she tore free. The trees blurred as I chased after her, branches lashing my face, sweat freezing and thawing in the same breath. We burst into the ravine clearing and stopped dead. The hatch was fully open now, wide. Exhalations of hot air rose from the blackness below, carrying the same wet hair smell that made bile rise in my throat. Sarah gasped, because Lewis was standing beside the hatch. Sort of. He swayed slightly, like he was learning how to balance. His head tilted too far to the left, neck muscles straining unnaturally. His eyes were glassy. His clothing hung wrong, stretched in odd places. Dirt streaked his skin where fingerprints, unhuman fingerprints, seemed to have pressed into him. Sarah, he whispered. Oh, thank God, I thought you. But the voice didn't match the mouth. It came a fraction too late. A half-second delay, as if something inside his chest was repeating a sound it had memorized. Sarah stepped forward. Lewis, we're here. You're okay. We'll get you out. No, I croaked. Sarah, stop. She didn't hear me, or she didn't want to. Lewis extended a hand toward her. The hand shook, fingers twitching in stiff, jerky spasms, knuckles bending the wrong direction for a moment before correcting. Please, he whispered. Help me. The words were too smooth now, too practiced. Sarah reached for him. That's when the breath from the hatch changed. No longer steady, no longer patient. It inhaled sharply, violently, like something below had detected prey. I lunged, grabbing Sarah and yanking her backward, just as Lewis's legs buckled, his body collapsing into itself like a puppet with cut strings. He hit the ground, and there was no bone noise, no impact thud, just a soft, empty pat. His head twisted toward us far too far until his ear hit his shoulder. The mouth moved. The voice that came out was not his, not human. Come down, Sarah screamed. She clawed backward, dragging herself through the frost. Lewis's body twitched, arms spasming like joints cracking, as something underneath the skin pushed, spread, learned how to inhabit the space it had chosen. A slow, wet stretching, a shuffle of new joints testing weight. Then the body rose, not by standing, by being lifted. Something unseen pulled it upward, making it hover unnaturally for a second before its feet dropped and scraped the ground like they were remembering how to touch it. I grabbed Sarah, running, dragging her through the trees while Lewis, or whatever was wearing Lewis, took its first steps out of the hatch. The sound that followed us was not footsteps. It was breathing. Right behind us, mirroring ours, matching our cadence, learning. We didn't stop running until the heat disappeared and winter returned like a slamming door. Sarah collapsed into the snow, sobbing, her breath ripping out of her in jagged bursts. I stood there shaking, staring back into the darkness between the trees. We never found Lewis's body again. We never filed the truth. We never went back. But sometimes late at night, when the station is quiet and the lights flicker and the forest presses its weight against the windows, I hear a faint tapping under the floorboards. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. Learning. Calling. Waiting. I shouldn't remember the sound of his breathing, but I do. It's the first thing that comes back when I close my eyes, the wet, panicked rasp of someone trying to suck air through blood. I hear it in the trees, in the wind coming off the ridge, even in the hollow spaces inside my skull where memory blends with guilt. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me up, is that I'm not even sure the sound is real anymore. My name doesn't matter, not if you've ever worn this uniform. If you've ever spent nights alone in a fire tower listening to the forest press against the windows, if you've dragged a search line through the dark while something moved just outside your flashlight's reach, then you already know people like me. You know why we stay quiet, why we sign paper after paper promising we saw nothing, heard nothing, reported nothing. The NDA is only the formality. The real silence starts long before that. I joined the service 12 years ago. Back then, my reasons were simple. I liked solitude, and I didn't trust cities. Noise made me feel trapped. Crowds made me feel watched, and every job I tried kept pulling me back into people's problems. Drama, anger, blame. Out here, problems were clearer. Someone got lost, someone got hurt, someone didn't come back. You searched until you found them or until the forest told you it was done with you. No interpretations, no politics. But on my 3rd year, I lost someone, a kid, 17. His name was Marcus, though sometimes when I'm half asleep, I hear it wrong, like something else is whispering it back to me but doesn't understand the shape of human words. He went missing near a talus slope about 8 miles north of the station, the kind of place where sound dies instantly, like the rocks swallow it. We searched for 3 days. I still don't know what I heard on the 2nd night. Still don't know if it was him calling for help or something pretending to be him. When we finally found what was left of him, nobody asked me what happened. They didn't have to. Nobody believed the injuries made sense, not even the sheriff. Animals, he said, and nobody corrected him. The report was sealed. I signed what they put in front of me. But the NDA didn't take away the breathing. That rasp never left. I transferred districts after that. Clean break, new forest, bigger territory. A place with deeper scars in the land, abandoned mines, collapsed prospecting camps, weathered roads that led nowhere. Locals said the area had stories. Rangers before me said the same but never explained. That's how they warn you without scaring you. A shared language of omission. My first month in the new district was uneventful. Long hikes, long nights in the tower, occasional calls about lost hikers who weren't actually lost, just drunk or stubborn. The usual. But near the end of summer, quiet started to feel like something was waiting. Silence felt taut, like the woods were holding breath. I noticed little things first. Trees bending in directions opposite the wind, animals disappearing from usual water sources, footprints around the cabin that weren't mine and didn't match any local species. I rationalized all of it. That's what we do. Denial keeps you functional. Then the dreams started. I'd fall asleep on the cot and wake to the sound of someone walking on the roof. Slow, deliberate steps, weight shifting just enough to creak the metal. When I finally forced myself outside with a flashlight, the beam hit nothing. No prints, no sign of anything climbing up or down. The second dream was worse. In it, I was back at the talus slope where Marcus had vanished, except the rocks were breathing, expanding and contracting like lungs made of stone, and something beneath them whispered my name. Not spoke, whispered like it had no lips, only intention. Dreams, I told myself. Stress, old guilt trying to surface. But the forest had its own way of calling bluff. One night, dispatch radioed in to ask if I'd been near the old Ridgewater mining tunnels. I hadn't. I was 15 miles away doing a trail check. Then who's using your call sign? Dispatch asked. My stomach dropped. Protocol says no one uses another ranger's sign unless they're incapacitated or worse. They played back the recording. The voice on the transmission sounded like me, but flatter, hollow, like someone was repeating my words with no understanding of what they meant. It kept asking the same thing, open the entrance, open the entrance, open the entrance, over and over until the signal cut. They chalked it up to a repeater malfunction, some weird interference. I went with that explanation until I went home that night and found the cabin door open, though I'd locked it. Nothing was missing, nothing moved, but the air inside was warm, humid, like someone had been breathing heavily in the small room for hours. The next morning, I hiked to the Ridgewater site. The mine was sealed by the Bureau decades ago, steel grate bolted into bedrock, warning signs telling visitors to keep out. But the lock was shattered, not cut, not pried. Shattered as if crushed by pressure from the inside. The bars were bent outward. Animal? Impossible. Human? Not with that strength. Earthquake? No tremors on seismographs. I ran every explanation through my head, clinging to rationality like a rope in floodwater. I swept the area, found nothing except smell, thick metallic like hot iron or burnt blood. It felt wrong to breathe it in. I backed away even though logic told me smell wasn't a threat. Logic starts losing arguments out here after a while. I filed the report. They filed my report, and then they told me not to talk about it again. Standard line. Natural causes, old structure gave way, you didn't see any sign of unauthorized entry. I signed the paper even though every word was a lie. That was the night I heard the breathing again. I was walking back from the station through a narrow corridor of old-growth pines. Moonlight barely made it to the ground. The trail felt too quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. My boots crunched the needles, and then suddenly they didn't. Something padded behind me, matching my pace. I turned, expecting a cougar, maybe a bear. Nothing stood there. But the sound didn't stop. It circled me, slow, measured, as if deciding where to stand. Then came the rasping, wet, uneven, familiar. Marcus. I froze so hard my teeth hurt. Breath held, muscles locked, every memory of that search flashing like lightning behind my eyes. The breathing sounded inches behind me, then to the side, then in front. Too fast to be footsteps, too close to belong to anything that wasn't already touching me. When I finally forced myself to move, my boots slid on something soft. I snapped my head down. Pine needles. Dirt. Nothing else. But the smell that hit me, sulfur, rot, a sweetness like decomposing fruit. I stepped back, heart hammering, and then the breathing stopped. Cut off so instantly it was like someone closed a windpipe. I ran the last half mile to the cabin. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, sat with my back against the wall, holding my radio like a weapon. At 2:47 a.m., the radio hissed. Not with static, with breathing. Slow. Wet. Rasping. Marcus's voice, his real voice, cut through the static like a knife dragged across stone. Why? Didn't you come? I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I didn't answer. What was I supposed to say? That I tried? That I heard him calling but wasn't sure it was him? That I was afraid? By dawn, the signal stopped, but the air in the cabin still felt warm, and when I stepped outside, the ground was disturbed. Pine needles shaped into impressions that were almost footprints, almost human. But too long, too narrow, and no stride between them, as if something stepped into existence, stood still, and vanished. I should have reported it. But there's a point where reports stop being paperwork and start being evidence of instability. I wasn't ready for the questions. I wasn't ready for the nodding sympathy. I wasn't ready to be transferred again, so I kept quiet. But the forest wasn't nearly finished with me. The next week blurred into a kind of waking fever. I patrolled the trails, checked campsites, logged wildlife sightings, did everything a ranger is supposed to do, just slower, more carefully, like every tree was hiding a listener. I caught myself talking under my breath, repeating mundane observations to anchor myself in reality. Trails clear, deer tracks, storm coming in from the west. Anything to drown out the memory of that breathing. On the fourth day, I started seeing movement where nothing should move. Not animals. Animals have rhythm, pace, identifiable shape. These were silhouettes that seemed to change posture the second I blinked. Once I saw a pale figure standing between two spruces, so still and straight I thought it was a dead tree stripped of bark. But when I stepped closer, the thing simply wasn't there anymore. The space was empty, the shadows unchanged. It left nothing behind except a smell. Cold metal, like the inside of an elevator. Rational explanations started to slip through my fingers. Sleep deprivation, stress, old trauma resurfacing. I clung to those, even though deep down I knew something else had entered the woods. Not newly. More like it had always been here and I'd finally wandered into its gaze. 2 nights later, dispatch called again. Ranger 27, do you copy? I answered, my throat tight. 27, go. Be advised, we got a 911 from a hiker on the North Loop. He said someone was stalking their camp. My stomach dropped. Human or animal? He didn't know. He sounded confused. Said the thing had his voice. I felt my blood turn to ice. My voice? No. The hiker's. Said something outside the tent, kept repeating what he said back to him. He's alone out there and he's scared. Coordinates? Dispatch read them out. Not far from Ridgewater. Too close to the mine for coincidence. I grabbed my pack, my light, my sidearm, radioed that I was en route. The forest felt wrong the entire hike, windless, but the treetops shifted like something brushed past them. The earth vibrated underfoot, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat slowed to geological time. I found the hiker's tent just after dusk. The fabric was slashed down the middle from the outside, clean cuts, almost surgical. Inside, sleeping bag, backpack, stove, all untouched. No blood, no signs of struggle, just a smell, faint but undeniable, wet animal fur mixed with something chemical. The hiker himself was nowhere. I crouched by the tent entrance and whispered, hello. The woods whispered back, not echoing, mimicking. Hello, hello, low. My breath caught. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't the hiker's. It sounded like someone trying to stitch together a sentence from scraps of dead conversation. My hand went to the pistol, but I didn't draw it. Bullets mean nothing to things without obvious flesh. I scanned the darkness. The beam of my flashlight caught something low to the ground, movement between the ferns. Long, pale fingers retreating behind a fallen log. I stepped closer. I'm with the Forest Service. If you're hurt, I can help. A voice rose from behind the log. Soft. Thin. Wrong. Help. Help. Ranger. Help. My chest tightened. The tone, the cadence, it was the hiker's voice, but hollow, like the lungs pushing it out had never learned how to breathe. I took a few steps back. Deliberate. Controlled. The ferns trembled. Something stood up. I only saw its outline. Too tall, too narrow, like a human stretched upward by the neck. Its shoulders hunched as if unused to the concept of weight. The head cocked sideways, studying me. Then it repeated in a perfect imitation of my own voice, help! I raised my light. The creature stepped back like the brightness burned. Its skin, or what resembled skin, reflected the beam in a way that wasn't natural, almost glossy, as if it were wet. I didn't chase it. You never chase what's retreating in the woods. You let it go, and you hope it does the same for you. I radioed dispatch, voice steady only because fear had drained it of emotion. No sign of the hiker. Tent's been compromised. I'm continuing the search. They told me to return at once. Let the other units handle it, they said. Except there were no other units. Everyone knew it. They just didn't want me out there anymore. But I stayed. I moved deeper into the loop trail, listening. The forest had gone utterly silent. No wind, no insects, not even the settling creaks of old trunks cooling in the night. Just the rhythmic vibration under my boots, growing stronger the farther I went, like something huge was moving underground. Then I heard it again. Breathing. But not Marcus's, not the hiker's. This was heavier, deeper, like air passing through a cavernous chest. I couldn't place the direction. It came from everywhere at once, pressing in through the branches, through the soil, through my skull. Something brushed my shoulder. My flashlight snapped toward the sensation. Nothing stood there, but the bark of a nearby pine was smeared with a thin streak of black, oily residue. I touched it with a gloved finger. It vibrated faintly, like it was alive. I wiped it on the ground, heart pounding. Something moved behind me, swift, silent. I spun, expecting a cougar, maybe a wolf. Instead, I saw a face. Not a full face, just the impression of one suspended between the trees. Eyes too wide, mouth hanging slightly open as if carved into the darkness. Then it blinked, and the whole shape dissolved like smoke. Cold washed through me. Not fear, something sharper, instinctive, ancient. The sense that a predator had just sniffed the air inches from my throat. I backed away slowly, step by step. The breathing followed, low, curious. My radio clicked. A whisper crawled through it. "Ranger, come down. Down. Not, come here, not, come help. Down, like an instruction, or an invitation, or a command. Something shifted beneath the soil. A deep groan rolled through the earth, bending the nearest trees as if a massive body turned in its sleep underground. Then the ground directly in front of me bulged. I stumbled back, breath caught in my chest. The dirt cracked open just enough to release a blast of hot, foul air, like a furnace exhaled through rot. It smelled like burnt hair and wet stone, and beneath that smell, another one. Blood, fresh. I aimed my light into the crack. Something glistened far below, dark red, pooling, and something moved in it. Slow ripples, as if a hand or limb dragged through thick liquid. I snapped upright. "Hiker, can you hear me?" Silence. Then faint, distant, muffled by layers of earth. Someone screamed. Not a long scream, just a single panicked burst. Then cut short. My instincts waged war. Jump down? Impossible. Radio for help? They'd tell me to withdraw. Pretend I didn't hear it? That felt like betrayal all over again. The breathing intensified, now rising from the crack itself. Something enormous shifting below. I took one step forward. The ground caved outward with a sudden shudder, as if something beneath pressed its face against the underside of the earth to smell me. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket, roots grabbed my boots, the forest pitching and tilting as if trying to slow me down. The breathing followed, silent at first, then growing louder, chasing me, circling me. My flashlight flickered. A whisper brushed my ear. "Ranger, down." I burst onto the trail, lungs tearing, legs trembling. I didn't stop until the cabin lights came into view. Even then, I stayed outside for a long time, staring into the black pines, waiting for the breathing to continue. It didn't, but something else did. From the woods, barely above a whisper, "Help, help, help." The voice of the missing hiker, or something learning to sound like him. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat in the cabin, windows bolted, ears straining for anything that might be outside. The smell lingered, faint but unmistakable. Iron, rot, wet fur. My mind kept playing tricks, telling me the shadows in the corners were shapes of trees. I kept glancing at the floor, half expecting to see prints that weren't mine. Elongated, narrow, too human to be an animal, too alien to be human. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Rational thought is the only that keeps you alive long enough to decide whether to run or stay. Morning came like a weightless fog. I went out to survey the cabin perimeter. Nothing, except the ground near the trail where the vibrations had led the night before had changed. The soil was pressed flat in irregular grids. Footprints? No, they didn't match anything alive. They resembled human feet at first glance, then split into strange angles, impossible lengths, and impressions of claws, teeth, and something I didn't have a name for. I called dispatch. "I need someone here. Immediate backup." "Negative. came the clipped reply. No units available for the area. Stay put until further notice. The calm in their voice chilled me more than the forest ever could. No one would come. Not for me. Not for anyone out here. I decided to hike toward Ridgewater again, even though every rational part of my mind screamed against it. But something in me, a mix of guilt and the need for closure, kept pulling me back. Maybe it was the voice. Maybe it was the memory of Marcus. Maybe I was just too far gone to distinguish between duty and obsession. The trail was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, makes your chest feel hollow. Even the birds were gone. Even the wind was gone. Then I saw the first figure. It stood between two trees, pale and long-limbed, motionless. At first I thought it was a tree, then it blinked, not like a human blink, fast, jerky, unnatural. My stomach turned over. The shape didn't move toward me, didn't move away. It just waited. I forced myself to speak. Identify yourself. The figure tilted its head, mimicking me, perfectly copying my posture. Then it spoke, my voice. Identify yourself. I froze. My rational brain argued that it couldn't be real, that mirrors and shadows sometimes play cruel tricks. But every hair on my neck and arms screamed otherwise. The air around me vibrated faintly like it was holding a pulse, synchronized with my own heartbeat. Something behind me shifted. I spun. Another figure, taller, wider, darker this time. Its head was obscured by shadows, but the outline suggested it had a face, or something pretending to have a face. Its breathing was audible now, slow, deliberate, oppressive. I drew my pistol. My hands shook. Every instinct told me it wouldn't matter, that this creature, these creatures, were beyond bullets, beyond reason. The first figure spoke again, still in my voice. Follow. You'll understand. I hesitated. Every fiber of my body screamed to run. But the pull of curiosity and guilt and the hope I could finally save someone made me step forward. The creatures didn't move. They simply drifted through the forest as if the air itself allowed them passage. I followed, keeping my distance. The trail they led me down was unfamiliar, narrow, twisting, overgrown. Branches tore at my jacket, roots grabbed my boots. The forest seemed alive, bending to the rhythm of their steps. Hours passed. I don't know how long. Time felt suspended like being underwater. Eventually, we came to a clearing I didn't recognize. In the center was a shaft, wide, carved into the rock, descending into darkness. I froze. The shaft wasn't on any map, not official, not topographic. It looked like it had been there for centuries, but freshly worn. The air rising from it smelled of iron, sulfur, and decay. A subtle vibration hummed through the ground. The figures moved to the edge of the shaft, and one of them, my voice again, gestured downward. I knew I shouldn't go. Rational thoughts screamed, primal fears screamed, even my trained instincts screamed. But something else, compulsion, maybe madness, maybe necessity, made me step forward. The descent was narrow, carved stone worn smooth by centuries of unknown traffic. My flashlight illuminated nothing but walls slick with moisture and strange black streaks. The smell intensified. My throat burned. My stomach roiled. The vibration underfoot pulsed like a heartbeat, growing stronger the deeper I went. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The scale of it made me stumble backward. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like jagged teeth. Shadows clung to the walls. And in the center, what I can only describe as a gathering, figures crowded together, standing motionless. Some humanoid, some not. Shapes elongated and twisted in ways that made my stomach knot. Faces, or facsimiles of faces, turned toward me, and the voices began. Not one, not two, but hundreds. Layered, overlapping, speaking, whispering, calling names. Mine, Marcus's, the hikers. Voices I recognized but had no right to hear. They rose and fell, chanting, laughing, moaning, crying. I pressed my hands over my ears, and then I saw movement in the shadows. One figure stepped forward. It was taller than me, limbs too long, skin slick and pale. Its face, when I blinked, mirrored my own. Perfect imitation. It raised a hand. Its fingers elongated into talons. It spoke in my voice. Do you remember? I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. My knees shook. My lungs burned. I realized I had been holding my breath for hours. I remembered Marcus, the hiker. The signs, the smells, the breathing. All of it. Every time I had rationalized, every time I had ignored the whispers, every time I had turned my back on what I knew, I had been followed. The creature smiled, or at least its mouth formed something like a smile. It tilted its head, and 100 more shadows moved with it, mimicking every angle, every twitch, every expression. I understood suddenly with a crushing clarity that sent my stomach into my throat. This place doesn't just remember screams, it absorbs them. It learns from them, it collects them, and it imitates. It imitates us until we are indistinguishable from what we fear. I tried to turn and leave. The tunnel behind me had vanished. The walls closed in. The vibration became violent, thrumming through my bones. The creatures moved closer, their whispers now synchronized to a single horrifying cadence. Come, join, come, join, come, join. I stumbled forward, blind, tripping over roots and rocks that hadn't been there moments ago. The figures closed in. Their faces, some mine, some Marcus's, some impossibly wrong, stared at me, unblinking, infinite. Then I heard a voice, soft, distant, coming from below the cavern, my own radio crackling to life. Ranger 27, report. I tried to shout, tried to move. My throat constricted, my limbs refused. The cavern seemed to pulse with intent, pressing in on me from every direction. I realized somewhere in the back of my mind that this place, the creatures, the tunnel, the whispers, had been waiting for me to find it, waiting for me to descend, waiting to see if I would recognize what I had become. I woke, or I thought I did, lying on the cold stone floor. The figures were gone, the cavern empty, the smell gone, only my flashlight flickering weakly. My radio silent, my hands trembling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might tear through my chest. I thought I was alone. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft as silk and cold as stone, coming from the tunnel I didn't remember seeing before. Ranger. Down. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't even move. I just pressed my back against the cavern wall and listened, trying to convince myself I had imagined it, that sleep deprivation and fear had finally fractured my mind completely. But the whisper came again, sharper this time, like fingernails scraping against wet stone. Ranger, down, now. The vibration underfoot returned, subtle at first, then building into a slow, deliberate thrum that matched the pulse of my own racing heart. I could feel it in my bones, in my teeth, in the hollows of my ears. Something enormous moved beneath the cavern floor, pressing against it, shaping it. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. The air grew heavier, hotter, fouled with the same metallic, rotten scent that had haunted me all week. I tried to stand, tried to move toward what my rational mind insisted was the tunnel's exit, but the ground shifted under me. The stone floor rippled like water. I stumbled. My flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling under a jagged stalagmite. Its beam spun wildly, illuminating shapes that shouldn't exist, forms between the shadows that were too thin to be human, too familiar to be anything else. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, elongated, head tilted at an impossible angle. Its skin reflected the faint light like oil on water, and the face, my face, was perfect, down to the stubble I'd neglected to shave last week. Its eyes were darker than mine, empty pits that seemed to drink in light. It didn't walk. It glided, dragging something behind it, something large, bound in chains, its shape obscured by the shadows. I staggered backward. Marcus? The word barely escaped my lips. The figure tilted its head, mouth opening into a grin I didn't recognize. No, not Marcus, but you know him, don't you? You brought him here. You opened the door. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. The chains behind the figure clinked, dragging across the stone floor with a sound that made my stomach twist into knots. A smell, foul, metallic, decayed, washed over me. Blood, burnt hair, wet fur, something ancient. The thing moved closer. Its imitation of my voice repeated over and over. Open, the entrance. Open, the entrance. I realized then that the shaft, the tunnel, the cavern, it wasn't just a place. It was a trap. A lure, and it had been waiting for me, studying me, learning my voice, my fears, my guilt. It had been shaping everything I'd seen, heard, smelled, felt, until it could mirror me perfectly. The chains scraped closer. The shadows lengthened. The cavern walls seemed to pulse outward, narrowing the space, pressing me toward the edge of the shaft I hadn't noticed before. The floor beneath me vibrated violently now, like something massive and alive was stirring below, just under the stone. I stumbled, nearly falling into the shaft. My hands clawed at the wet stone walls, the slick black streaks cutting into my palms. The figure drifted forward, gliding across the floor, its face still a perfect imitation of mine, voice echoing inside my skull. You belong. Down. The weight of the forest, the shaft, the tunnel, the cavern pressed on me from all sides. I realized that whatever waited below wasn't just a predator, it was an intelligence. Calculating, patient, observing me through every moment of my life, through my mistakes, through my guilt. It had been gathering my screams, my failures, my solitude, and now it was ready to test me. The chains fell silent. The figure extended a hand. I noticed something horrifying. The shadows along its limbs were filled with faint impressions of faces, hundreds of them screaming silently. And among them, I could see Marcus, the hiker, even glimpses of others I'd never met. I tried to move backward. My boots slipped on the slick stone. My flashlight fell again, illuminating the bottom of the shaft. I could see movement, not human, not animal, something vast, writhing, with limbs or tentacles or roots, too distorted to recognize, but unmistakably alive. A faint heat radiated from it, warping the air. The vibration was synchronized with my heartbeat now. It was waiting for me to descend, waiting for me to choose. I wanted to run, but the exit, the way back, was gone. The cavern had shifted, walls stretching impossibly, twisting the space. The echo of my own voice repeated back at me endlessly. I realized that this place, whatever it was, had no intention of letting me leave. Down, it whispered. Not once, but all around me. In my ears, in my chest, in the vibrations beneath my feet. My own voice repeated it. Down, down, down. I fell to my knees, shaking, hyperventilating. Rationality was gone. Fear had obliterated it. The shadows reached out, brushing my skin, cold as stone, yet warm as blood. Every nerve in my body screamed in pain, pleasure, panic, and confusion all at once. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not human, not alive in the conventional sense. Its grip was firm, unyielding. I spun around. My face met mine. My body, my own features, mirrored in a figure that was not me. Its eyes bored into mine. You came, it said. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I understood somewhere deep that this was no longer about survival. Survival was irrelevant. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted me to see it, to understand that I had been chosen, not by chance, but by inevitability. The shaft's edge was only a few feet away. I could feel the massive shape below stirring, waiting. The vibrations had grown into a tremor that threatened to collapse the cavern around me. The shadows around the figure pressed closer, whispering in the voices of all the lost, all the taken, all the abandoned. Join, join, join. And then I stepped. I don't remember the fall, only the sensation. Falling through cold, viscous air, brushing against shapes that were real and unreal, the voices merging into one unbearable chorus. Heat and frost collided on my skin. The smell of metal and decay filled my lungs. I screamed, though the sound was lost in the vastness. The cavern below was alive, not walls, not stone, not tunnels, but consciousness. Every surface pulsated, breathed, shifted, responded. I landed on something soft, something yielding but solid. My legs buckled, my flashlight shattered somewhere above. Darkness became absolute. And then I heard it. Again, unmistakable. Ranger, down. Not a whisper, a chorus, a command, a welcome. Something moved beneath me, rising, pressing upward. I realized that the cavern itself, the tunnel, the shaft, the forest, none of it was just terrain. It was sentient. It had waited for me to descend, to confront what I had ignored, to face the weight of all that had vanished under my watch. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed. Hours, days, moments that felt like centuries. Voices from above, voices from below, voices in my own head, all urging, coaxing, demanding. I began to lose the distinction between what I saw, what I felt, and what I was becoming. The last thing I remember before the edges of consciousness dissolved was the sensation of being lifted, not by hands, not by force, but by intention. the forest, the cavern, the shapes, the voices, all drawing me deeper into something ancient and patient, something that had been waiting for me and for all the others. I write this now, though I don't know who will ever read it. I don't know if I will ever be the same, if I am still me, but I can hear it, even as I write, in the spaces behind my eyes. Ranger, down.